I stood on the balcony of our condominium, looking at the wide brown ribbon of dirty Mississippi winding 4 floors below. The sun had almost reached the horizon, but it seemed in no hurry to complete its daily journey. Instead, it just hung there on the edge of sunset in the thick, humid summer air that turned it lemony and creamy. That lazy old sun, honestly, you could look straight at it forever and not go blind. The dim, hesitant sun seemed the perfect metaphor for my situation. My marriage, my life, everything I knew. Total. I looked at my hands lying on the railing. The wedding ring stood out, the same dull yellow color as the fading disk on the horizon. I don't know what it was, the poet in me or the curious child who suddenly surfaced. Whatever it was, I took the ring off my finger and looked at it for a few seconds. Then I swung my hand and threw it with all my might. Right into that lazy old lemon sun. I must admit, everyone played perfectly. In truth, it wasn't that difficult. God knows I've wanted Sandra Trulson since we first met. She was everything a true Southern belle should be. Beautiful, modest, strong-willed, witty, smart, and just very beautiful and incredibly cool in every possible way. 5'4", slender, with a trim chest, soft blonde hair, and mocking blue eyes that seemed to laugh at some inside joke about everything and everyone around her. Her outfits were always conservative, her makeup was light. Overall, she was the perfect daughter for every family photo that came her father's way. Unfortunately, despite my obvious adoration, the object of her idolatry was always my older brother, Stevie. Stevie was everything I wasn't. Tall, athletic, with thick, curly brown hair, dimples when he smiled, and an easy manner that won people over from the first firm handshake. Stevie was meant to follow in our father's footsteps. Everyone said so, and everyone was right. He had both the ease of communication and that internal competitiveness that seemed to be necessary for all successful politicians. He was definitely his father's son and would one day succeed Dad as senator from Tennessee. To do this, he needed the perfect Southern beauty nearby. Again, most people thought Sandra Trulson was perfect for the job. She will look graceful and charming and give him offspring with the same thick hair and toothy dimples. The fact that her father was Speaker of the State House of Representatives wouldn't hurt either. I had just gone to bed after the concert when the phone rang. "I hope it's something important," I muttered. "It's Stevie," Mom sobbed. "He's dead. There's been an accident." I don't remember the next week well, although some moments remain in my memory forever. I remember Sandy at the funeral, dressed in black. I remember thinking that her thin veil perfectly complemented the dark gray clouds that were moving towards those gathered in the cemetery. I remember my mom and dad hurried past a crowd of reporters shouting questions and got into a long black limousine that immediately drove away. I almost laughed. Imagine my dad avoiding journalists in the midst of a hot election race. "Perhaps it's time for us to leave, son," said the deep, velvety voice of the priest, taking my hand. I looked around and saw that there was no one else around. Just me and him and the cemetery workers, rushing to fill this gaping black hole before the rain started and turned it into mud. Dad won the Senate primary by a landslide, thanks in large part to voters' sympathy for the tragic loss of his young, charismatic son, who was killed at the height of his undoubtedly brilliant career. Now, looking back, I understand that this is where it all started. Politicians masterfully exploited every situation, not shunning any opportunity, no matter how dirty it might be. I think the faces said it best. I wish I knew then what I know now when I was younger. It's hard to believe that your own family could do this to you. A year and a half later, the day after Thanksgiving, my father sat me down for a serious conversation. We sat in the living room, his office, away from the actual office. Everything was furnished with bulky chairs and dark wood, deep burgundy carpets, and a massive oak table. This was probably the third or fourth time I'd been allowed to stay here for more than 10 seconds, which meant something serious was about to happen. "What are you going to do with your life, Mark?" "What do you mean, sir?" "I mean," he said, looking at me intently and taking a sip of bourbon before continuing, "you can't put off growing up forever. You can't keep jumping from one bartender to another, dreaming of one day becoming a famous rock star. Would you mind letting me finish law school before I throw all my energy into conquering the world? Not sharp. I remained silent, preferring to grind my teeth and seethe with anger. He continued to look at me, and I noticed something click in his head. I waited for him to change course. "You're in your last year," he said. "There are 6 or 7 months left, and you will have to look for a job. Have you thought about this?" I smiled. "I filed an application with the public defender's office," I challenged, "in Memphis." Now he was grinding his teeth. "Memphis," he finally said, "Office of the Public Defender." "Exactly." He shook his head. "That won't happen." "Why not?" "Because my son will not defend the criminal. Can you imagine what the press will say if you manage to get these bastards out? Will I be congratulated for giving meaning to the constitutional guarantee of innocence until proven guilty? Don't be impudent. You know what I mean. You won't work in this damn office. And you will stop me?" He nodded. I remained unperturbed, knowing full well that he could really call whoever he needed and make sure they didn't take me there. "What then? What plan do you already have for my life?" We must give him his due. He did not grin condescendingly when he saw that I had conceded. "Are you in the mood for Memphis?" I nodded. "I need to start my life on my own. I can't do it here in Nashville, Dad. You understand, right?" He nodded, took one last sip of bourbon, and stood up to pour himself another. When he turned to me, I was surprised that he handed me the second glass. I took it and drank the soft amber drink, coated my tongue with a smoky aroma, and burned my throat as it went down. "You are right. You need to get out there and make it on your own. But, but there's no reason why you can't accept a little help from the old man at first, right?" "What help?" He put the glass down and leaned forward. "I spoke with Jim Parker from Parker and Smythe. They have a few openings, and he's definitely interested in you." I closed my eyes and leaned back, turning my voice to the ceiling. "You want me to leave Nashville, and your way to help me start a new life is to get me a job with your campaign chairman. You will not work at my headquarters, Mark. He has 2 openings for new employees. One is an associate partner who deals exclusively with appeals, the other with corporate litigation. He said you'd fit in just fine in any of them." I sighed and lowered my head, looking at him. He looked so sincere, believed so unshakably in his own lies, that I even began to believe him too, although, of course, he set me up. He knew that I insisted on Memphis, and he prepared a plan for this eventuality. But this plan was truly flawless. "Tell him I'll take the position of appeals assistant," I said, "not corporate litigation." "Appeals," I confirmed. "This will at least keep me away from all those businessmen who only want to be around because of you." He wilted, but only a little. "I'll call him this afternoon." Agreed. I stood up, knocked back the rest of the bourbon, and set the glass down. "See you at dinner, Dad." "You won't even thank me." "For what?" He didn't answer. A little less than a month later, I was helping Edwina clear away the glasses and plates on the first floor. Another Christmas party has come to an end, and with it gone dozens of politicians and their cronies who came to pay their respects to David Roberts, Tennessee's senior senator. "Mark," Mom said. Her voice sounded sharp, with that same tint that made it clear that I should not stoop to helping the servants clean up after guests. "I'm almost done, Mom. Edwina is already tired. I want her to quickly go home to her grandchildren who are waiting for Santa." I looked at Edwina, and she smiled nervously. The smile was such that it became clear. I better leave before I get her into even more trouble. I took the hint and carried the tray of dirty dishes into the kitchen. "Have you seen Sandy Trulson today?" Mom asked while I was loading dishes into the dishwasher. "Saw. Have you talked to her?" "A little. Only a little." I turned to her, leaning against the countertop. "What are you talking about, Mom?" She pursed her lips, then switched to a conspiratorial whisper. "I think she's not indifferent to you." "Is it true?" Her melodramatic whispers seemed a little exaggerated to me, and her conclusions seemed too far-fetched. Deborah and Pat said she was slowly coming out of her depression, the mother continued. Pat was talking to your dad, and Deborah cornered me and asked if you were interested in her. She said Sandy was asking about you. Pat said the same thing to your dad. Nothing obvious, but she's clearly interested in you. Strange, I said. I didn't feel anything like that when I talked to her. Mom smiled mysteriously, which only confirmed her next words. We know how to hide our feelings, you know. We are not as open as you men. I didn't yet understand that I would remember these words more than once many years later. Anyway, Mom continued before I could say anything. Dad and I were thinking that you could call her and invite her to dinner. There's a Christmas party at the club tomorrow night, and I know for sure that she doesn't have a date. And you want me to call her at the last minute. Why not? Because she might not want to go. Mom smiled mysteriously again. I'm almost sure he will, if the right person invites her. Why are you suddenly so insistent on this? I asked. She looked hurt, but I've seen that expression on her face a million times. I'm sure all mothers rehearse this look in front of the mirror. Admit it, I said. Is it my fault that I want you to be happy with the girl you've always been in love with the same girl who was? She touched her eyes with her fingers, as if wiping away invisible tears that I didn't see and wasn't sure were there at all. With the same girl who almost became part of our family, who has always been like a daughter to me. Mothers, some of the best masters play the role of a martyr. Even if it doesn't touch your soul, you still give in so that they stop nagging you. I think it's in their blood. I sighed. Okay, but on one condition. She looked up and her face immediately lit up. Yes? You will let Edwina go home right now to her family, and you won't find fault with the fact that I'm helping her. Mom sincerely did not understand my request. Why? She's getting paid for this, Mark. And you, for a change, can show at least a little gratitude, Mom. Damn it, it's Christmas. Don't you dare blaspheme on Christmas. I waved my hand. Yes or no? But who will clean up this mess then? I shrugged. I think I am. But you need to go to bed. I'm almost done. I'll go to bed soon. But yes or no? She turned to the door to the other room, clenching her jaw. After all, what's the point of being a new-age Southern belle if you have to clean up after your own parties? Then she turned to me again. Okay, I'll let her go home. I smiled, stepping back from the tabletop and taking a step towards her. Then I'll call Miss Sandra Truelson tomorrow morning as soon as good manners permit. Mom turned her cheek as I approached, and I lightly kissed her on it. And thank you, I added, glancing at her briefly. Maybe. She smiled. I'll let Edwina go now. Damn it, but Mom was right. You call me at the last minute, and this is on a Saturday, by the way, and you think I have nothing better to do than go to this stupid Christmas party with you? Sandy's words didn't match her light, playful tone. She joked, and she had long been an expert at this. The joke made me feel stupid, realizing that I was inviting one of the most beautiful and sought-after young women in Nashville to a prestigious party at an elite club just a few hours before the start. But there was something else in her tone, hidden self-irony, when she embellished her situation in order to then laugh at it cheerfully. It was this trait that made her so damn charming to everyone who knew her. She could laugh at everything and everyone, especially herself. Well, she asked. I grinned. I guess that's what I do, Miss Sandra Jean Truelson. You sound pretty confident, Mark Roberts. I laughed, and so did she. Well, I understand that you can refuse Sandy. I have no doubt that your dance card is probably full for this and every Saturday night thereafter for the foreseeable future. I just decided to take a chance. Oh, really? Take a risk? Exactly. Take a risk, even if it's small. She laughed. Well, she said, pausing for a moment before continuing, I'm currently scrolling through my social registry, and, as you can imagine, I happen to be free this evening. I grinned. It was a game, But I imagined her devilish smile on the other end of the line as she played the game to its inevitable end. She must have been wrapping a lock of her soft blonde hair around her finger. Her eyes were sparkling, and her slender legs were crossed, while her foot swayed slightly in the air. In that case, I said. Yes. What? You said in that case. Well, in that case, what? Didn't I already invite you to the party? No, you asked. I clearly remember asking if you would be so kind as to accompany me to the party. I know I asked. It's impolite to interrupt a lady. It is impolite to correct a gentleman or make him languish in anticipation. Am I keeping you waiting? That's exactly what you do. Okay, Mark Roberts. Then I won't keep you waiting any longer. What time will you pick me up? At 6? Too early, don't you think? Not to spend more time with you. She laughed quietly and quickly. Damn, you're good. You pour smoothly. So, 6? At 6. Dad lent me the Cadillac to pick her up. This damn thing won't fit, he said, waving his hand towards my Ford Escort. At 5 minutes to 6, I pulled up to Pat and Deborah Truelson's white Georgian mansion and parked directly in front of the massive columns. Pat Truelson himself opened the door for me. Mark, come in, he said, opening the door wider. Sandy is still upstairs getting ready. A few more minutes. Will you join me in the office? Shall we have a little drink? Of course, sir, I replied, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Tennessee House Speaker Patrick Truelson was everything a Tennessee politician should be. He was 5 inches taller than me, and his body seemed as strong as when he was a quarterback for the Volunteers in the Southeastern Conference. His hands were huge, his face was long and friendly, and his hair was neatly combed back, black and gray. Even in jeans, a blue shirt, and a gray cardigan, he looked like a man accustomed to being in charge of everything he did. Think about it. Is it easy to look good in a cardigan these days? Don't call me sir, he said, leading me into the office. And for God's sake, don't call me Mr. Speaker. He deliberately exaggerated his southern accent on these words, pronouncing them slowly, mist air speak air. He took 2 glasses of bourbon from his desk, handed one to me, and pointed to the chair next to him. Just call me Pat, okay? I nodded, trying to smile. So, what are your plans, son? He asked as I settled into a chair and took a sip of bourbon. I looked around the office while I answered. I will finish my studies soon, sir. In May. I'll take the bar exam in July, get my results in September or October, and start a long, hopefully happy career as a lawyer. His office was almost identical to his father's, right down to the burgundy carpet. I wonder who copied the style from whom, or maybe politicians used the same decorator to create offices that should look cold and impressive. The only noticeable difference was that my father had a marble bust of General Lee on the pedestal, while Truelson had a bust of George Gordon, a general originally from Tennessee. Like, he asked, noticing my glance at Gordon's bust. I chuckled. Some say he was one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan, sir. His smile tightened slightly, and he hesitated before answering, I told you, call me Pat, son. Sorry, sir, but that's how my parents raised me. He nodded, leaned back in his chair, and took a sip of bourbon. Fine. Anyway, your father told me that you already have a job with Jim Parker's firm in Memphis. I only interviewed them once. I haven't heard back from them yet. He chuckled. Believe me, everything has already been decided. I just nodded, a little annoyed that everyone around me believed that I could only get such a prestigious job thanks to my father's connections. I was on the staff of the Law Journal at Northwestern University, sir, I said. I have already turned down nearly a dozen offers from leading firms in the Midwest. Then why Memphis? I hesitated, then decided to tell the truth. I love the local music scene. Music scene? Yes, sir. I play guitar in a band in Chicago, but I think the music scene in Memphis is more interesting. What about a legal career? I shrugged. Just a way to make a living. His face became serious. What about your responsibilities to your family? Family? Wife? Children? I have neither wife nor children, sir. He wanted to say something, but then he changed his mind, relaxed, leaned back in his chair, and smiled. But one day you will have them, Mark. And when that happens, will you continue to chase the dream of being a musician, or will you focus on giving them the best life you can give them? Honestly speaking. He hasn't thought about it yet, Dad. Sandy's voice came from the doorway. I stood up hearing her voice and turned to her. She was amazing, elegant, dazzling. In short, she looked like the blonde version of Audrey Hepburn in the old movies where she played the princess. Only instead of modesty, there was always a slight mocking expression in Sandy's eyes, just like now, when she stood in the doorway, illuminated by the light from another room. So, Dad, stop scaring him before we even have one date, she said with a smile. Of course, dear. I'll wait until the third date. You leave him alone, Patrick, Deborah Truelson intervened, also appearing in the doorway. Good evening, Mark. Good evening, Mrs. Truelson. Are you ready to go, Mark? Sandy asked. When you're ready. She extended her hand to me, and I walked up to her and took her arm. Good night, Mr. and Mrs. Truelson. Take care of our girl, Pat shouted after me. I promise, I replied, walking Sandy to the car as quickly as possible. Sorry about that, she said as soon as we set off. There's nothing to apologize for. She laughed. What? I asked. Think about it, Mark. They never do this to girls, only with the guys. You mean first date interrogation? Exactly. Her laughter continued. Just imagine. I smiled and did a parody of her father. So tell me, young lady, what are your intentions regarding my innocent son? Oh, Mr. Speaker, she said, putting a hand to her cheek with feigned innocence, I assure you, my intentions are entirely honest. Then, well, sorry, young lady, but we have to cancel this date before it even starts. Oh, you're impudent, she exclaimed, lightly hitting me on the arm. I laughed. When my laughter died down, we both fell silent. What are you thinking about? She asked. I felt her gaze turn to me, and I didn't want to spoil the evening at the very beginning. Nothing in particular. You can tell me, you know. I don't bite. I glanced at her quickly, then focused back on the road. What are your intentions, Sandy? She hesitated. What do you mean? I mean, well, it's a little weird, right? You know, that you were engaged to Stevie. I waited for her answer, but she didn't say anything. We were silent until we arrived at the club, and I parked. Stevie is gone, she said as I turned off the engine. I didn't look at her to confirm the bitterness in her voice. It was already obvious. We all need to move on, all of us. Almost a year and a half has passed, and we need to move on with our lives. I understand, I whispered. And I like you, Mark, she said, placing her hand on my forearm. I turned to her, and she smiled faintly. Is it true? I've always liked you. But not Stevie. I know. She turned and laughed, but it sounded almost bitter. Trust me, I know that for sure. Then she turned around again and said, I'm not trying to replace Stevie. You, of all people, should understand this, right? I looked at her with a strange look, but she only pursed her lips in a tense smile and wrapped herself tighter in her shawl. Why should I know this? I wanted to scream, but I restrained myself. Silently, he got out of the car, walked around her and helped her out, and then took her to the dance. And on the first night of the rest of our lives. The Christmas party was a success. Oh, whatever. Why lie? Okay, she was great, okay? Best damn night I've ever had with a girl at any party without ending it with someone hitting me over the head at the end. Honestly, this whole damn Christmas holiday was amazing. It seemed like it all started with a Christmas party, dancing and talking, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. She came early the next morning just to be close, and then we drove around all day. Christmas Eve was dedicated to family, but on Christmas Day, we were able to spend almost the whole day together. One of the benefits of having politicians in the family is that they spend the holidays in homeless shelters and hospitals, taking lots of photos to prove that they really care about those who are constantly being lied to by their corporate cronies. This left Sandy and I free to do whatever we wanted. When the doorbell rang at 9:30 on Christmas morning, I trudged down the stairs in my pajama pants and opened the door to find a beaming Sandy standing there. Her eyes scanned my naked torso with obvious approval. Okay, there's not much hair there, but I'm much stronger than one might think, not as skinny as the baggy shirts and loose pants would indicate. Her gaze lingered on my stomach for a moment before her eyes met mine. Her blue eyes sparkled as she clapped her hands and said, "Did you buy me a present?" I smiled through a yawn, nodded, and waved my hand at her, inviting her to enter. She hugged me, her icy clothes pressed against my bare skin, and I immediately woke up. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas," I replied and kissed her. She kissed back with more passion than before. It was with great effort that I interrupted him. "Let me brush my teeth first." "Not too bad," she said, then tossed her coat on the hallway bench, kicked off her shoes, and thrust the gift into my hands. "I also brought you something." I smiled, looking at the small box in my hands. I shook her. It was light, and nothing rattled inside. "But I'll open my present first," she said, walking past me into the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Certainly. I'll do it while you get yourself ready." "I got it," I replied, watching her sway her hips in her jean-clad buttocks as she headed down the hallway. "Move," she said louder, not even bothering to look back. "I want to see what you gave me." 10 minutes later, we were sitting with scalding coffee next to the Christmas tree. "I wonder what this is," Sandy said, picking up the box and having a hard time holding back her laughter at my pathetic attempt at wrapping her gift. Then she tore the paper like a little child and opened the box. "Oh, Mark," she said, looking at the 3 silk scarves curled inside. "They're beautiful. Do you think so?" She looked at them one more time, then put the box aside and leaned towards me, giving me a long and passionate kiss. "Really?" she said when the kiss ended. "Then maybe you'll like this too," I said, pulling out 2 more boxes from under the sofa. They contained 2 blouses and a sweater, and her kisses made me understand that she liked these gifts even more. Having finished my coffee, I stood up. "Have you opened my gift yet?" she asked, trying to make a dissatisfied grimace, but could not cope with joy. "In a minute," I said, holding up my empty mug. "I need energy." Returning a minute later, I sat down next to her again and handed her a small box. "Just one last thing." Her eyes widened as she looked at the box, then at me and back at the box. "You shouldn't have spent so much. I gave you almost nothing." I smiled. "You made me happy. For the first time in my life, I understand what they have always said. What is better to give than to receive?" Her fingers trembled as she carefully unwrapped the small box. Then, looking at me at first as if she was afraid to continue, she opened the box and looked inside. "This is wonderful, Mark," she said, and a silvery tear welled up in the corner of her eye. "Merry Christmas, Sandy," I said, wiping a tear from her eye as she pulled a small gold locket out of the box. "Open it." She did just that, looking at a photo of us dancing cheek to cheek on our first date a week ago. She smiled, but her smile was so sad that I was afraid I had done something wrong. "Everything is fine." She nodded, simply looking at the photo, then gently closed the locket and handed me the box. "Please put it around my neck." I complied with her request, and her fingers lingered on the small medallion at her throat. I said nothing, preferring to drink coffee and wait for her to calm down. Her gaze was fixed on the empty box on the floor next to her crossed legs when she spoke. "Sorry, it's just, the thing is, you might be the nicest guy I've ever met." And she looked at me and smiled. "And what? It's a compliment, stupid." I shrugged and smiled wryly. "Thank you." She leaned over and hugged me tightly, holding me close to her, and quietly said, You really are a wonderful guy, huh? I didn't answer, preferring to simply hug her warm, soft body back. Okay, she said, breaking the hug and standing up, trying to force a smile. Let me make some more coffee and then you can open your gift. Hurry up, I said after her. 30 seconds later, she knelt behind me again, wrapped her arms around my neck, and whispered in my ear, "It's not too much, I guess. It all depends on how you feel about it." I tried to take my time and act like an adult, but soon the wrapper was torn off and the box was open. Like, she whispered in my ear, "This is—" I began, then pulled a pair of lacy white panties out of the box. "I took them off before I came here," she said. "You mean—" "Yeah," she said, then started kissing him. "I hope you use the gift for its intended purpose," she whispered, then ran her fingers over my chest. "You mean—" I started again. "Merry Christmas," she whispered. "Let's go upstairs," she said. "No way," I replied, pulling her towards me. "They won't be coming home for several hours." "But if someone comes to the door," she said, but her face revealed that the thought excited her. "Then they'll have the Christmas show of a lifetime." "Do you promise?" "Definitely." We made love. "What are you thinking about?" she muttered. Sandy spun around until she was facing me. Seeing my face, she gave me an encouraging smile and stroked my cheek. "You feel guilty, don't you?" I shrugged. For Stevie, I closed my eyes. "It's all a little confusing." "We need to move on, Mark." "Both." "Yes, I was engaged to Stevie. But he left, okay?" "But I'm not like him at all. I don't understand why you—" "That's exactly why I'm here. With you. Now. Because you're nothing like him, okay? If you were like him, well, then we'd both have trouble moving on, wouldn't we? And there's no way this agreement of ours would work. That is, I would be looking for an exact replacement, and you would try to be him. But you're not trying to be him. You never tried, and you never will. You two weren't competing. And if you were like him, it just wouldn't work. It would be too hard. Except for you," I said. "We were competing over you." Her hand stopped on my cheek. "You never asked me out, Mark. Never. But I was going to. He knew it and beat me to it. I didn't know. He never. Don't feel bad. It doesn't matter. That's not why I said that. But if I—" She looked me straight in the eyes, and doubt and sadness were mixed in her gaze. She understood what I meant, and her lips pursed. "You are right. If I had known if you had invited me at the same time as him, I would have chosen him. You're right, but so what?" "What do you mean, so what?" "Just this. And what? This was then, and this is now." "You talk like it doesn't matter anymore." "But it doesn't." "Why?" "I don't understand you. Stevie was big, masculine, handsome, and popular. He was a leader, a quarterback, and the chosen one. And I'm small and skinny, I play the guitar, and I don't look like him at all. How can you be attracted to me after him?" Her crooked smile played on her lips again, and her right eyebrow shot up sharply. "You see the short one and the pimply one, and I see a slim and cute one. You see someone who is introverted and shy, but I see someone who is kind and caring. Stevie had his faults, Mark. We all have them, right?" "Yes, but I feel like you're driving a Volkswagen after you have a Ferrari." She stroked my cheek and then gave me a kiss. There was something grateful, cozy, and gentle about him. It was a kiss with love. We made love for 3 weeks. Neither of us could get enough of the other, and towards the end, it started to bother me a little. 2 days before I returned to Chicago, we were lying in bed in the middle of the day. "Why are you so depressed?" she whispered. "What should we do now?" "Now." "I'm leaving in 2 days. You're leaving in 3. Are we going to continue this? We'll see each other on the weekends when we can. We'll be together all spring break. We'll communicate on the internet, and we'll continue." "Are you sure? And you?" "Maybe." "Maybe." She rolled over and started tickling me, her soft blonde hair falling over my face and sticking to my lips as I tried to fight back, trying not to hurt her. Maybe I'm just a fling for you for a while, and then you go back to the big bad city where you have a bunch of groupies chasing you and your stupid little band. They're not stupid, I countered. Fans or group. Neither, I said, but especially the fans. You're a pig, she giggled, doubling over with laughter. We rolled around on the bed for another 10 minutes, laughing, tickling each other and teasing, until we finally calmed down. When it was all over, we lay next to each other. I'll be here for you, Mark, she said seriously. You get your diploma, I'll get mine. I might already have a job in Memphis, and we'll rent a house and get married and stuff. I turned to her, not believing my ears. Are you saying you love me? What? You're kidding. She smiled. Why? Do you love me? You know I am. You never said that. I didn't mean to scare you. It seemed like it would be too soon. So you love me? She exclaimed joyfully. I nodded, smiling. Then say it. Say what? That you love me. Fine, I love you. Say it as if it were true. Sandra Trulson, I love you with all my heart. Not a single star in the sky burns as brightly as my love. Oh, shut up, she said. I said it like it was real, not like it was a Hallmark postcard. I laughed. But it's true. Is it true? Is it true? She beamed, then said, Okay, I think I love you too. Do you think so? She shrugged. Too early, don't you think? Little crap, I said. Did you just call me trash? Yes. For some reason, this caused her to burst into even more fits of hysterical laughter. Sandy kept her word. Every day, often 2 and sometimes 3 times a day, she sent me letters. Funny letters, cute letters, funny letters, letters complaining about someone or something. She shared everything. We called each other 3 or 4 times a week, which was not cheap, given the distance between us. But somehow, although we were far from each other, we became closer. Through our correspondence and calls, I learned to predict her mood and laugh to myself at her impulsive, sometimes completely unpredictable character. She said the craziest things, and sometimes it was hard to tell if she was joking or serious. And just when I was about to ask her about it, she chuckled quietly, and I laughed along with her, puzzling over her jokes for the rest of the evening. It was crazy, fun, stupid, and weird, just like in old movies or David Gates songs from the band Bread. Sandy was more than just a breath of fresh air. She was a strong, constant impulse that burst into my life, and all I could do was hold on to her for dear life. God, that was great. We spent spring break together in Chicago. She saw me and my ragtag band perform twice, once at a club in Lincoln Park, once at a country bar in the middle of nowhere. We spent the rest of the week making love as usual and spending our days holding hands, walking through the Loop, museums, the zoo, and along the boardwalk. Why are you so gloomy? Sandy whispered, clinging to my chest. I was lying on my back, looking at the ceiling. She was curled up on her side. I just shrugged slightly. Are you sad that it's time for me to leave? Her voice sounded happy at the mere thought, as if my embarrassment and depression were cute to her. What is this anyway? I asked, a little louder than I intended, turning to face her. She pulled away, surprised at first, but the smile quickly returned. This is the last semester before the rest of our lives, stupid. What is all this, Sandy? What's between us? Now she looked puzzled. What do you mean? What exactly? Us. Don't you understand? I'm not sure. She rolled her eyes and made a funny face. Oh my God, looks like I'm going to have to think this through for both of us. You see, I don't know when you're serious and when you're just making fun of me. Her face became completely serious and her eyes pierced mine. Do you want seriousness? Fine. So much for seriousness. We both graduate at the end of May, move to Memphis, rent apartments closer to each other, get engaged in September, and have a beautiful wedding the following August. Serious enough, my jaw dropped. Is it that simple? She smiled that crooked smile of hers. No need to complicate things, right? I shook my head. How long have you been planning all this? Happy Christmas. She looked at me slyly and winked. That's when I almost definitely decided that I could endure life with you. Do you remember? Of course I remembered, but it seemed that she was simply leading the conversation astray. So when you seduced me under the Christmas tree. I didn't seduce you, she screamed in mock protest. It was a Christmas present, and don't you dare say it was a cheap gift. Anyway, I continued, already smiling, ever since you, took advantage of your feminine charms, played on my holiday spirit, that's when you decided that you wanted to marry me. She shrugged. About that. I nodded. Do I have any say in this? Certainly. If your mom doesn't mind, maybe you can even plan your own bachelor party. She and my mom are already making all the other important plans, probably right now. I laughed. Yes, sure. She saw that I was serious and sighed heavily. Men can be so stupid sometimes. Do you think it's all simple? Planning a wedding. You're serious, aren't you? Now her face became puzzled again, and after a few seconds angry, she threw back the blanket and sat down, turning her back to me. What's happened? I asked. Do you really think that the thought of marrying me is so disgusting to you? What? No, of course not. It's just all so. Well, you caught me off guard. She turned sharply to me, and her eyes were still burning. Do you think this is easy for me? I raised my hands as if in surrender. I literally throw myself at you like it's Christmas, and you think that doesn't make me feel at least a little underappreciated. Damn, Sandy, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to. I don't want to. You're not the easiest person to understand, and I don't want to make a mistake and ruin everything, okay? Look, if you want to get married, hell, I'm ready now. Let's go to the mayor's office, take a certificate, and find a judge. Her face became questioning again, then softened, and then her signature smile appeared again. Okay, let's not spoil the schedule. Remember, the engagement ring is around September. The wedding ring is next August. Should I get down on one knee or something? Everything that happened over the next 18 months turned out exactly as Sandy promised. We both bought apartments in Memphis, although it was for rent and, for the most part, empty. We got engaged in September. I passed the bar exam and received my license in October. We got married in August, and her father was elected governor of Tennessee in November. Oh, damn, that's right. There was one small flaw. Shortly after our graduation, Pat Trulson announced that he would run for governor next year. So what would otherwise have been a small mention in the gossip pages, U.S. Senator's son marries state speaker's daughter, became a sensation for the gossip columns, People magazine, and all those damn newspapers you buy at the checkout along with toothpaste and ham. So our engagement announcement was not limited to family and close friends. Oh no, instead it was sent to the press with precision and efficiency by the people at Pat Trulson's campaign. And then, to make things worse, the campaign chose exactly the angle that would maximize public attention and irritate Sandy and me. From tragedy to true love, as People magazine put it. Entertainment Tonight, tired of Lindsay Lohan, Charlie Sheen, Brangelina, Paris Hilton, the Kardashians, and everyone else, decided to make Sandy and me the new heroes of romance, family values, love, and success. Heck, whatever, Sandy and I became favorites for a while. HLN and CNN decided that was a good idea too, and as a result, I was constantly running into video cameras, reporters, and photographers outside both my condo and my office. You need to collaborate more with them, Patricia Burley told me for months. As Trulson's press officer, she was responsible for making as much profit out of this as possible, so I didn't really trust her. How exactly, Patricia? Do you want me to bring them coffee and bagels every morning before setting aside a couple of hours for photo shoots and interviews? Oh no, bagels, to New York. This won't work, but cookies would be nice. I stared at her. She was completely serious, apparently impressed that I had almost come up with a really good idea. However, Sandy didn't seem to mind all the attention. On the contrary, she bathed in it. She was always perfectly prepared, dressed just right, with just enough but not too much makeup and a bright smile that could turn into a sad expression when Stevie was mentioned, and then turn back into a shy smile when it came to how we fell in love, friend, and about our upcoming wedding plans. I must admit, Sandy was a natural actress. However, she had a master's degree in communications and worked at a PR agency, so I guess she should have been good at that. The noise died down when photos and videos from our wedding, which was supposed to be private, somehow leaked to the press just weeks before the November election. Pat Truelson's speech to the crowd, in which he both praised Sandy and me for moving on with our lives and eulogized Stevie, brought him to the finish line. In the end, he won by a large margin. What about me? I wanted to beat them all up. Patricia Burley, Pat Truelson, photographers, reporters, cameramen, and everyone who provided commentary. This whole damn company. Luckily, well, honestly, unfortunately, Sandy and I were too busy organizing the house and dedicating all the rooms in our new, larger condo by the river for me to stay mad for long. So yes, life was good. A little over 3 years. Until there was a problem. The problem's name was Napoleon Bonaparte Bonnaroo. I know. I reacted that way too. Nap Bonnaroo was a pretty normal guy, if you don't take into account his string of petty thefts and petty crimes involving illegal substances and alcohol. Simply put, when Nap Bonnaroo started drinking or taking something, he would take something that didn't belong to him and sometimes get into bar fights. Unfortunately, in 1996, someone entered the dewdrop in east of Memphis with ill intentions. This someone, trying to keep his face away from the low-quality camera, approached the register with a gun, demanded money, shot the bartender, and fled with a Pall Mall block and $300 and change, for which he killed a young single mother. The cops were lucky, or so they said. Someone was overheard telling someone who happened to mention to a confidential informant that Napoleon Bonaparte Bonnaroo had bragged to his buddies about shooting. 2 days after receiving this dubious advice, cops spotted Knapp leaving a liquor store and detained him for questioning. Of course, Knapp was eager to get back to his 2 half-pints of Old Thompson, which he carried under his arm, and refused to go with them. The cops, used to people like Knapp, simply handcuffed him, took his drink to take home, and took him to the station anyway. 11 hours later, the cops had a confession. In their own letter, unsigned, but still a confession. Or so they claimed. What about Knapp? He was beaten. Resisting arrest, they said. The judge denied Knapp's motion to have the confession declared inadmissible. A jury later found him guilty. Death sentence. The state Supreme Court did not provide clear guidance, instead choosing to send the case back to the trial judge for resentencing due to another mistrial. The judge, reading the writing on the wall, overturned the death sentence on other grounds and sentenced old Knapp to life in prison without parole. Now that Knapp had a life sentence instead of a death sentence, appeals on the previously pending issue of confession began to be heard again. This time it started with a state appeals court, which upheld the judge's decision. The Supreme Court then overturned the Court of Appeals decision and found that the confession was essentially inadmissible. However, they added, there was no basis to overturn the conviction as there was sufficient other evidence to support a conviction. So, they said, allowing the jury to hear the confession, the bulk of the prosecution's case, and the only thing tying Napoleon Bonaparte Bonnaroo to the crime scene was a harmless mistake. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear the case. It would all have ended there if not for one circumstance. Inmates in prison have little to do other than try to escape violence and file endless petitions in the courts. Knapp must have immediately found a good lawyer among the prisoners. His petition for a writ of certiorari was filed timely in Memphis federal court. That's where I came in. The one thing federal judges hate most is dealing with prisoners who have nothing better to do than file meaningless, often hard to read or incomprehensible petitions. Therefore, all of us who are licensed to litigate in federal courts have to take at least one such case a year, investigate it, and present it competently. Of course, it's free. The Nap Bonnaroo case was my first. Even a cursory examination of the case, which took 15 hours, showed that this poor guy had been in prison for a decade based on a false confession that he probably never made. "It's yours," Jim Parker told me after I finished explaining the whole thing to him. "You continue to work on other things, but you do everything you can to fix it. If you need someone to bounce ideas off of, you have Harvey. But you still have to manage all of Harvey's business and everything else that comes along, okay?" I nodded. Parker leaned back in his chair. "This is the big league, Mark. You can advance as far as you want, but you will be the one presenting the case, understand? This happens in large law firms. What better way to give inexperienced lawyers real-life experience than to have them handle a case for an indigent prisoner? Who cares that this poor guy might actually be innocent and suffering, and that he'd be better off with someone who knows what he's doing? Welcome to the real world." I was, of course, terrified. My legal career at that time consisted of studying appeal cases, endless research until I was completely tired, and drafting appeals. I never strategized, I never showed up in a courtroom, I never argued before the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati or anything like that. Now I had all this to do, and the life of Nap Bonnaroo depended on whether I could not ruin the matter. Moreover, I still had to work the other 65 hours a week on other things. What a joy. The problem started 2 months later. "Any problems?" Sandy asked, lying on her side under the blanket with her head resting on her arm. "You know I need to finish my research," I said, pulling on my jeans. "Damn it, Mark, it's already 5:30. Morning. On Sunday. But you know this is the only time I can do it." "And what is this business?" "The case of a federal prisoner." "Murderer, yes." "No. But you said he didn't do it. And you're trying to free him?" "Yes. And that means you can't get home before 11 every damn night. And why are you forced to spend 12 hours in the office on weekends? Do you think I like this?" "Well, it doesn't seem like it bothers you that much." I dressed in silence. In a way, Sandy was right. Come to think of it, it was pretty exciting. This was my chance to do something good for some poor guy's life. "Well," she insisted as I buttoned my shirt. I walked over and sat on the edge of the bed. "What do you want me to do? Just let this poor guy rot in prison for the rest of his life for a crime he probably didn't commit?" She pouted, but it wasn't the fake offense she usually feigned. There was sadness and resentment behind this. I've never seen this on her face. Never. "Listen," I said, leaning toward her. "I'll be home by 1 or 2, okay? I promise. And then we can spend the rest of the day and evening together. Whatever you want to do." She didn't answer, just looked at me. When I leaned over and kissed her, she didn't kiss back. When I returned home at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Sandy was nowhere to be found. She didn't answer the phone. And she wasn't home by the time I fell asleep on the couch a little after 10. By the 3rd month, Sandy was barely talking to me. Her face was a constant mask of sadness, anger, pain, and contempt at the same time. This could have made me angry or forced me to solve the problem, but I was too busy preparing for the hearing on the Bonnaroo case. District Court Judge Leland Dusterberg was old, grumpy, and strict about the rules. This means that when you ask for an extension, you must have very good reasons. The prosecutors realized this when their first request to extend the time limit for responding to our petition was only partially granted, and the second was completely rejected. The judge kept a tight schedule to get this case out of the way quickly, and our hearing came sooner than I expected. The hearing lasted 4 days, during which we presented our witnesses and made arguments. When it was all over, Jim Parker told me to take a week off and not come back until Monday. "Sandy," I shouted as I entered the apartment. No answer. I tried calling her on her mobile. No answer. I called her office. Autoresponder. I called her parents. They haven't heard from her for weeks. I called several of our friends. 2 were cold towards me, the 3rd only mumbled something. It was almost midnight. I sat on the deck, looking out over the dark, winding waters of the Mississippi, flowing 4 stories below, south toward the Gulf of Mexico. My feet were on the railing, and I had a small Taylor guitar in my lap. I was absent-mindedly playing a few songs, chord progressions, little snippets of melodies, and wallowing in self-pity, wondering where Sandy was, when I heard the sliding glass door open behind me. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was lifeless. "Waiting for you." "For what?" "Because you are my wife. Because I finally finished that thing. At least listening. I have 3 days off, and I want to spend as much time with you as possible." Just like that. Just because? You've been ignoring me for the last 5 months, doing everything to push me away, and now you just want to come and say, "Hey, it's over. Now we can go back to normal." I thought about this as I continued to pluck the strings. Sandy seemed willing to wait. "Sorry," I finally said. "You say that. You talk all the time. But you don't change anything." "How would you know?" "What do you mean, how would I know?" "I mean, Sandy, you've been gone for most of the last 3 months. I took days off to spend time with you, but you were always gone. Nobody knows where you are, you don't answer your calls, your friends treat me like an enemy when I call them. So where have you been?" "Same place as you," she said defiantly. "At work. Since you decided to quickly move up the career ladder, I thought that I should do the same. But when I call there, no one answers. Because it's easier to work when you don't have to be distracted by phone calls every time." I nodded, continuing to play my guitar as I looked at the slow flow of murky brown water below. "I'm going to bed," she finally announced. I was still sitting there, and he remained on the terrace 6 hours later when she woke up, got ready and left for work without saying a word to me. I spent the weekend alone, walking along the waterfront, drinking beer in quiet bars, and playing guitar on our terrace above the river. I didn't know where Sandy was, and she wasn't going to tell me. Our rare meetings at home were full of tense silence, as if none of us wanted to give in and take the first step. Although I thought I had already taken the first step on Thursday night, she swept me off my feet. We were on the verge of a serious break in our young marriage, and I did not know how to close the gap and return everything to its place. Sandy didn't seem interested in doing anything. I was up to my neck editing the final draft of the appeal at 11 o'clock on Monday morning when my secretary poked her head in the door. "You won't believe it," she said. "What?" "They called from the court office. You need to be with Judge Dusterberg by 2. "Did something happen?" "The decision has been made." I leaned back in my chair, not believing my ears. "We just finished the hearing 4 days ago. Decisions in such cases usually take weeks or months. They are never taken within a few days. I knew this didn't bode well. The only reason the judge came back with a decision so quickly was because he would deny the motion. Lunch passed in vain attempts to hold a glass of iced tea and raise my head, which kept falling onto my chest from disappointment and shame. I worked like hell on this case and wanted Napoleon Bonaparte born to be able to walk the streets again as a free man, which is what he deserved and what he was obliged to give justice. With these thoughts, I, with my shoulders slumped, entered the federal courtroom and headed to the table in front of the judge's bench. My embarrassment and disappointment were compounded by the fact that, due to a traffic accident, I was 10 minutes late. "Glad to see you made it, lawyer," Judge Dusterberg muttered. I looked up and muttered an apology. In response, he grinned like a Cheshire cat and said, "I ask all lawyers to come to the bench." Margie Lane, a plump state attorney in her late 40s, walked confidently toward the bench while I hesitated at the table. "Don't be shy, Mr. Roberts," the judge said. "The petition has been granted. A release warrant has been issued." Margie froze halfway up the bench, turning to me. There was an expression of shock on her face. She read the situation the same way I did and was stunned that she lost. Slowly, not believing my ears, I forced myself to step forward and walk towards the bench, passing the still frozen Marga Lane. Judge Dusterberg handed me 2 thick, stapled stacks of papers. "One for you, one for her. The secretary already has the original." Looking at the decision, which was clearly over 100 pages long, then at the judge and back at the papers, I took both copies, standing there like an idiot, not knowing what to do next. The marshals are serving the warrant to the warden right now, and Mr. Bonnaroo should be released in a couple of hours. Thank you, I finally mumbled. The judge just shrugged. Margie finally found the words. Your Honor, the state requests that Mr. Bonnaroo not be released until. Save it for the appeal, lawyer. The judge interrupted her sharply. Your application has been rejected. He will be released on his own recognizance. If you want to change this, go to the Court of Appeal. She was not ready for this. The decision was rendered so quickly that she did not have time to prepare the inevitable appeal to the Sixth Circuit Court. Jesus Christ, I suddenly realized. I did it. Right the first time. Complete success. And by the way, Mr. Roberts, said Judge Dusterbeck, standing up, very good work. Unfortunately, that means you'll probably have to deal with more cases like this. With these words, he left. I turned and looked at Margie. She stared at me angrily. I tried to hide my emotions, but I knew that a stupid smile was spreading across my face as I handed her her copy of the solution. She abruptly tore the papers out of my hands and said, "This is not the end." She quickly left the hall. I stood there for a moment, enjoying the victory, however short-lived it might be, then picked up my briefcase and left. I did it. I sat on the sidelines waiting for them to finish reading the decision. My boss, Harvey Firestein, finished first. He already knew what to look for. When he finished, he placed his solution in his lap and raised his head, giving me a big smile. 5 minutes later, Jim Parker finished reading, closed the file, pushed it aside, and stood up, holding out his hand to me. Absolutely brilliant, young man. I stood up and shook his hand. Thank you. No, Mark, I'm serious. I don't know how you did it. I suspect Leland has some sort of disagreement with someone in the state system, perhaps one of our Supreme Court justices, but this case is sacrosanct. There's nothing to grab onto here, and there's no way he wrote this solution in 4 days. He worked on it for weeks. Heck, Scalia himself wouldn't dispute that. Harvey slapped me on the back. He's right. I bet they won't even appeal. I looked at him skeptically. Seriously, Mark, they are funded by taxpayers. Their case was no good, and they knew it. I really don't understand how the appellate courts allowed this to go on for so long. Not to mention that idiot at the first trial. Still, I think you win. When will we know for sure? I asked. Harvey shrugged. The best option is by the end of the day tomorrow. Why? Because if they appeal to the Sixth Circuit, they will file a motion to send Knapp back to prison, or at least set his bail too high. It's done quickly, and they need to serve it while they still know where Knapp Bonnaroo is. I nodded, remembering Knapp as he was when we first met, and the 4 days he spent in court. He was gaunt, pale, and nervous. Prison was clearly not for him, and I was sure that he would not last long there if he was sent back. Parker's phone rang. Yes? Pause. Fine. Call the press. We're on our way out. He hung up and turned to us. Bonnaroo is still under arrest in the federal sector of the district. They were planning to transport him this morning, but they received a call from the court clerk. The warrant had already been served on Warden Tompkins, and he gave the go-ahead for Bourne to be released here. The papers have already been completed and sent to the district. It's time to go. Where? Parker looked puzzled for a moment, and then laughed. Mark, this is big news. This guy spent 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Add in police brutality and a string of misguided court decisions, and you've got the biggest story for the evening. On the front pages tomorrow. And you think I'm going to let a company miss out on free advertising? Do you think we'll miss the chance to introduce our new golden boy to the world? Then his eyes narrowed, and he added, You know, you should cut your hair shorter more often. And please tell me you have a freshly ironed shirt in the office. Please. I smiled and shrugged. Sorry, boss. He could play the part of the young, frazzled lawyer who's been up all night working for this poor guy, Harvey suggested. Parker thought for a moment and then said, Good idea. Mark, touch your chin more often. Let it seem that you are tired, that you are really exhausted from all this work. Survive to the last drop, understand? I nodded. Great. Now go ahead. Everyone will be there in 15 minutes, and you need to be first. Jim and Harvey were right. When Jim, Harvey, Knapp, and his mother and I walked out of the main entrance of the prison, crowds of journalists, photographers, and cameramen were already waiting for us. Jim and Harvey stood back while Harvey pushed me firmly behind me towards the podium already set up on the steps. Apparently, prisons are used to such events, but I'm definitely not. Questions rained down one after another to me and Nep. Nep played his role perfectly, or rather, he was simply himself scared, relieved, lost, and confused. I think I did pretty well too, because the adrenaline had already worn off, and I was really exhausted to the limit. I rubbed my eyes, stroked my chin, and even yawned a few times. The press ate it up with gusto. Then the questions suddenly changed direction and caught me off guard. Do you think the state will appeal? Don't know. Have you discussed this with your father-in-law? I instantly became wary. Absolutely not. However, Mr. Roberts, if they don't appeal, don't you think it will be in your favor? After all, you are now relatives. If that were the case, I said, then why was there a hearing at all? No, sir, Governor Truelson is a great man, an honest man. He works for the taxpayers, and I worked for Mr. Bonnaroo. The taxpayers' interests were more than adequately represented by Margaret Lane, and she made every effort to protect their interests. But as the court made clear in its decision, this should never have happened, and it all happened long before Patrick Truelson became governor. So there's tension between you and the missus? Another reporter asked. I felt how everything inside me sank, and I could not hide it. I hunched over a little at this question. All I will say is that I have spent days and nights in the office, 7 days a week, for the last 5 months working on this case. Tried to free an innocent man. This, naturally, made itself felt in a young marriage. This required changes and sacrifices. However, I love my wife, she loves me, and I want to thank her from the bottom of my heart for supporting me all this time. Was it worth it? Someone shouted. I gave an annoyed look and then thought about my answer. Then I turned to Knapp, who was standing next to me, looking shy and puzzled. Standing next to him was his mother. She was over 60, but looked 20 years older. Her skin was sagging, wrinkled, and chapped. Her gray, tangled hair hung in rags, and her clothes were faded and threadbare. She gave me an almost toothless smile as tears streamed down her cheeks. It's not a question of whether it was worth it, I said, looking at Knapp and his small, wizened mother as my voice became hoarse and full of emotion. It's a question of whether it was the right thing to do, and the answer is yes. My eyes filled with tears when Bonnaroo's mom came up to me, hugged me, and buried her face in my shirt. She cried and thanked me, and Knapp joined in the hug, after which she hugged us both so tightly that I thought I would suffocate. This old lady hugged you in such a way that it took your breath away. The press came closer, cameras were clicking everywhere, but we did not pay attention to it. I wanted to enjoy this moment, the moment when I helped real people, not a faceless corporation. Real people who were unfairly wronged, but now, thanks to me, they got their lives back. Internally, I thought that this feeling of satisfaction and pride would be some kind of consolation for me when my marriage failed. Jim and Harvey insisted on taking me out for dinner and drinks to celebrate. Knowing that Sandy, as usual, wouldn't be home until an unknown hour, and to avoid annoying my two bosses, I agreed. Oh my God, Jim Parker kept saying, you were just great. Is this a family hug? These tears? Boy, you're definitely going to be on CNN. Yes, Harvey agreed. Just perfect. We'll be swamped with work for a while. New clients, Parker said dreamily, rubbing his hands at the thought of the additional income that would soon flow through the doors. Sandy was sitting on the couch when I got home, and the only light in the dark apartment was the lamp next to her. I stopped after a couple of steps and froze, looking at her. Hi, I finally said. Hi, she whispered back. I was nervous, not knowing what it meant. Saw you on the news, she said, staring at her lap. Yes, I won. She looked at me again, and I saw silver traces of tears on her cheeks. They really needed help, didn't they? Yes, I answered hoarsely. They really needed help. He didn't do it, did he? No. And his mother. She looked so sad and exhausted, and I looked at you as if I were God, as if you were something incredible, as if you were the only luck they had ever seen in their entire lives. She was just glad her boy was released from prison, I guess. Sandy sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Do you mind sitting here with me for a while? Maybe it's just. She waited for me to move, but when I didn't, she looked back down at her lap. Don't talk, I said. Let's just forget, okay? She looked at me again, trying to find meaning in my face. I threw my jacket on the back of the chair and walked over to the sofa, kneeling in front of her. This won't happen again, I said. I promise. Next time they will have to find someone else to close everything for me. She shook her head. No, if this happens again, you will do whatever it takes to help him. Or to her, or to anyone else. I feel so selfish, Mark, like a first-class bitch. You're not a bitch. I just thought you were leaving me, that you don't want to come home and you're just using it as an excuse to. I don't know, make it hurt less when you finally move out. I won't do that, I said. We're in this for the long haul, right? She again looked for an answer in my face. She seemed unable to believe my words and wanted me to convince her. For how long? I nodded and then smiled and shrugged. Well, at least until you get bored, right? She laughed through her tears, which caused her to have a couple of hiccups. Who said I'm not tired of it already? Before I could answer, she leaned in and hugged me tightly until her tears dried, and my shirt was soaked for the second time that day. And for the second time that day, I felt my body relax with relief. Moreover, I realized that I truly felt like a superhero, like Superman. It's like I dodged 2 bullets in one day. And so it went on for the next 3 years. Everything is back to normal. Sandy and I both worked 60 hours a week. We spent quiet evenings and relaxing weekends together, and we were both moving forward in our careers. For 3 years, everything was fine again, until Governor Trolson decided to try his hand at fighting for the White House. That's when I learned for the first time in my life what it felt like to be betrayed. And not just anyone I loved, but almost everyone I loved. The Tennessee governor's residence is a beautiful red brick mansion in Nashville. One of the bonuses of being a boss, I guess, is the ability to live in this huge house if you want. What about the cons? Well, I'm not sure how I would take all these tourists wandering around the house on their tours. It seems strange to live in such a big house if you can't have sex on the stairs whenever you want, right? Anyway, Sandy and I were among the relatives staying at her parents' residence. Who else was there? Well, her parents, 2 younger brothers, and my parents were gathered around the table. That's how I realized that something important was brewing. Darlene, the busty, scruffy, sullen elderly maid, wheeled out the dessert cart just as Pat stood at the head of the table. I want to thank everyone for coming this weekend, he said, raising his glass of wine. For this, we echoed, raising our glasses and taking a sip. I refused the pudding and Pat smiled at me. Darlene, honey, pour him a glass of bourbon instead. I looked at him and his face was strangely tense. Me too, if you don't mind. She nodded and hurried to the kitchen to get some bourbon. I'm not sure how to say this, he continued, placing the glass in front of him but remaining standing. Just say it, Pat, my father said calmly. His sly smile showed that he knew what would happen next. Yes, Dad, tell me what's on your mind, Patrick Jr. said boredly. I'm going to run for president, he said, looking at our faces for a reaction. I'd like to say that I was shocked, but I wasn't. Politicians always do this. They strive for higher positions and even higher positions. When you become governor, working in the legislative branch is no longer interesting. You are no longer the boss, the leader, the big shot whom everyone pleases. The only higher job for Pat Trolson is the White House. Um, well, Deborah and I talked about it, and we decided it was now or never. The Republican field is weak at the moment, and I have a real chance. Southern politicians dominate this level, my father agreed. Pat smiled nervously. Let's hope. He sat down, looking around at everyone at the table until his gaze fell on me. What? I said. It was not a question, but a statement. I need everyone here to be on my side on this, Mark. I nodded. And you suspect that I won't support you because... He got nervous. You and my girl. Are you all right? I was surprised. He looked at Sandy, who simply smiled nervously in response, then looked around at the rest of the faces at the table. Everyone looked at me as if they didn't know the answer. Why not? You two still don't have kids, Deborah finally said. Not my fault. I assure you, I am doing my part. Pat smiled widely. So, I can count on you to travel with me to events. Holding hands, smiling, and looking like a loving young couple. Certainly. I turned to Sandy. Is it true? She beamed. Absolutely. What was that tonight? I asked a couple of hours later, when I climbed under the covers in the guest bedroom assigned to us. What? Sandy asked, yawning. This whole check. How is our marriage? Big bets, honey. I don't think they want any obstacles before the primary, or, if he gets to that point, before the general election. Why did they think there might be problems? She shrugged her shoulders tiredly. I have no idea. You didn't tell them anything? Not a word. I told them we will support him. So you already knew about this. They told me when we got here. And you didn't tell me? She smiled lazily. I didn't want to ruin the surprise. Did they ask you about our marriage? Yes. And you said? That we're in this for the long haul. She snuggled up to me and curled up next to me. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling. After a minute, I said, Sandy, why don't we still have children? She propped herself up on her elbow, lying on her side and looking at me. Because we never discussed it. Is that the only reason? Do you want children? I don't know. I mean, we're both so busy all the time, I guess I just didn't think about it. Although I would think that we would at least somehow talk about it someday. Why? Isn't that what most couples do? But we're not most couples. I turned my head and looked at her. Her expression was unreadable. She seemed puzzled by my questions, and I couldn't understand why. Do you think we could talk about this someday? Soon? Her eyes narrowed, then a bright smile appeared on her face. An expression of unbridled joy appeared. Of course, she said. When we get out of here, when I get back from this trip to Denver, we'll sit down and calmly discuss everything. Maybe next Sunday? Agreed. She hugged me, whispering in my ear, I really love you. Is it true? I whispered back. She pressed herself closer to me. Is it true? An hour later, all her declarations of love and my understanding of what true love is were destroyed, like a crystal glass thrown into a fireplace. Sandy was no longer pressed against me. Instead, she was curled up on the far end of the bed, breathing lightly and evenly, indicating that she was fast asleep. I was cheerful. The whole evening made no sense, and not for the first time, I was struck by Sandy's strange answers to simple questions. Realizing that I wouldn't be able to fall asleep anytime soon, I carefully stood up and put on my robe. Maybe another glass of bourbon will help me sleep. I had to walk quietly so as not to wake anyone. I went down the stairs and was surprised to see light coming through the almost closed office door. As I got closer, I heard voices. You never told him? Asked Pat Trolson. Of course not, my mother replied. Why? Because he wasn't the problem in this matter. Sandy was the problem. How so? The boy was in love with her almost from the cradle, explained Deborah Trolson. Sandy, on the other hand, has always been a little wild and damn independent. So how did you convince Sandy to go for it? Asked my father. I felt a deep chill run through my nerves, cold caused by anger and humiliation. Deborah laughed quietly. To be honest, we weren't convinced. I begged her to at least go on a date with him. Suddenly something will work out. She didn't want to. She thought it was creepy to date Stevie's little brother. But I told her that she should at least try for her father's sake. If everything goes right, and the timing too, it will literally lead him to the governor's mansion, and she will benefit from it. Her career will benefit. Someone snorted, and Pat said, "Well, that definitely worked." She was hesitant for the first week or so of their first dates, Deborah continued. But at Christmas, she came home smiling from ear to ear. I think she slept with him, and he turned out to be good in bed. Is that all? Pat laughed. I'm not sure, but she came into my dressing room that night and said she could last long enough with him to get married, maybe a year or two after the wedding. And poor little Mark just got caught in her net, my father said mockingly. She's a beautiful girl, my mother said, and he was in love with her from the very beginning. This was his dream. After a short pause, Deborah continued. She always acted like she knew she could hold out. She thought it was just a game and that he would never suspect anything. There was silence, and I felt my hands begin to go numb from how hard I clenched my fists. After a moment, Pat asked, "So what kept her with him all these years? Do you think she loves him now? That is, she doesn't have any friends on the side. We don't need this now." Deborah chuckled. "I have no idea. She seems pleased. I think it's just a matter of inertia." They were both busy with their careers, my mother said. Probably neither of them had enough time to find someone else and go through this whole process with divorce and so on. "So are you sure," asked Pat, "that they'll stay together, I mean?" "Mark isn't going anywhere," my mother said. "And Sandy said she was fine with it," Deborah added. "I heard them putting glasses on the tables," then my father said. "Well, let's hope so, Pat, because your chances are really good. The slightest mistake can turn this whole cart upside down." "Do you think so?" I heard their footsteps as they all headed towards the door. I stepped back, pressed myself against the wall in the shadows. All I could do to keep myself from running into them and causing a scene was to keep myself from going out into the hallway. In my state of rage and confusion, I probably would have beaten them all to a pulp. 5 minutes later, when my parents and Sandy's parents went upstairs to their bedrooms, I was still pressed against the wall. Thoughts were rapidly spinning in my head. Now everything became clear. Sandy's strange answers finally made sense. Her reactions to my moods, her facial expressions when she talked about love and devotion, planning our wedding, it was all one big game for her, and the thought made me furious. Then another thought struck me. She always acted as if I knew about this game. It was as if I, too, understood that our marriage was concluded for political reasons and not for love. If she had known that I was in the dark, she would have played her cards much more carefully. But now my thoughts were rushing out with such speed and force that I felt dizzy. If it was just a game for her, did she really have lovers? If she never really loved me, then why was she so upset when I had a rough patch with a Bonnaroo case a few years ago? And why did she seem so relieved when it was all over and I came back to her? I couldn't find an answer to any of these questions, not even one. If she had lovers, she must have met them during work hours. However, with the exception of those few months when I was involved in the Bonnaroo case, our intimate life practically did not suffer, except for the natural ups and downs that are inevitable in any relationship. And during this downturn, it could be attributed to my long working hours as well as hers. However, it was an arranged marriage, a marriage based on political necessity rather than love and commitment. Has it become something more since then? From my side, yes. But did Sandy ever love me? Did she love me? Or was she just attracted to me? Or did she just tolerate me? Or did she despise and ridicule me? Suddenly, all the questions about Sandy faded into the background when I realized that my own parents had betrayed me. Without telling me a word, they took advantage of me. Both. How the hell can you do this to your son? Seriously, how the hell? On Sunday, I walked Sandy to the airport for a 2-day business conference in Denver and then drove back to Memphis to do some last-minute shopping and laundry. I went to bed early, but spent most of the night tossing and turning, wishing I had said something to Sandy before she left. Perhaps the bed wouldn't seem so damn temporary. Monday morning, when I walked into the office, I looked and felt like someone who had been to hell. Emotionally, I was not ready for work. Physically, my energy was at zero. My problem was that I had no idea what to do. Should I contact Sandy? What would I say? Hey, I came to know that this is all just an arranged marriage. Are you sure you don't want to get a divorce? And then, of course, she would look at me like I was an idiot. Well, damn it, obviously a moron. Worse, she would insist that we stay together at least until the election. And how could I refuse her? If I'm happy, do I really care if she truly loves me, or do I just keep playing, wondering when this whole illusion will finally fall apart? Sandy seemed quite pleased. Damn, we were both happy. Did it matter if there was love there? Does it matter how it all started? Arranged marriages happen all the time, both in politics and in third world countries. So what, do you think Jack Kennedy married Jackie because of great, eternal love? No, of course not. He married her to get rid of rumors that he had been chasing skirts all his life. And after the wedding, he still continued to chase skirts until the very end of his life. But Jack Kennedy married with full understanding of the situation. I don't. And yet, perhaps Jackie didn't know the whole truth at first, and then fell in love with him anyway. Just like I thought I was in love with Sandy. And now I'm not sure I still love her. Mr. Roberts? I looked up from the wall and focused on my secretary, Thelma Sanderson. In her hands, she held a tall stack of thick folders. Yes, Miss Sanderson. Do you mind if I find a place for this here? She looked around the office. Certainly. What is this? All the documents for your father's campaign committee. Mr. Parker said he no longer had any free space and told him to find somewhere to put it. Since this is your father, I thought this would be a suitable place. How long? She shrugged, leaning over to stack the files next to the boxes of appeal documents I was sorting through. A couple of days, probably. As you say, I said, turning again to the wall. I don't know why, but I sat and looked at the walls for another 10 or 15 minutes. These folders, it was as if they were calling me. They beckoned to see what was inside. Jim Parker's men, along with an army of tired accountants in rumpled suits, constantly rummaged through these books. I saw them gathered around the huge table in the main meeting room every few weeks, arguing, writing numbers and notes. I was always glad that I was not involved in this nonsense, but my mind was tired of worries, and I decided to look into these documents. Dragging 2 of the folders to my small desk, I turned over the first book, which contained the latest entries for the first quarter. It was full of copies of Federal Election Commission reports and all the other records required to check for irregularities. In short, all this was Chinese literacy for me. When I put the first folder aside and opened the second, I saw something completely different. It was a series of memos on various campaign finance issues. Now, this was more like what I understood, boring details that make up the essence of the law. How to classify this or that contribution, how to name expenses so as not to miss anything or arouse suspicion. These are serious things, I thought. Campaigns try to be as careful as possible. Why on earth would a poorly filed expense be the thing that would cause problems if some reporter from the New York Times wanted to dig through those papers in his spare time? Almost an hour later, my problems and work on my desk were forgotten when I came across a curiously titled note. Employee support or consultant. It was short, just under 3 pages, but it was the first 3 paragraphs that literally jumped off the paper and knocked the wind out of me. Question: how can child support payments be properly labeled so that they comply with Federal Election Commission regulations without revealing the true nature of the payments? Reading further, I discovered that alimony payments were regularly made to one Clarice Talbot. They had been paid for 7 or 8 years, but the rules for classifying payments for campaign employees had changed. The finance committee wanted to continue paying child support with campaign funds, but didn't want to attract attention by mislabeling the payments under the new rules. I returned to my desk and entered the name Clarice Talbot into the search engine. There were dozens of results, but one article from the Washington Post stood out. There was a photograph of my father in his Senate office with a young and attractive Clarice Talbot, his secretary, standing next to him, leaning over him as he signed documents. I opened the Senate website with my father's profile. There was no Clarice Talbot there. I went back to the books. After 20 minutes of feverish searching, I found the address. The checks were sent to a small town in Illinois, Grant City. I've heard about him. A small town an hour's drive from Chicago. I went back to the search engine and confirmed through white pages that Clarice Talbot still lives at the same address in Grant City. There was nothing else. Not in the books, not on the internet. Then I leaned back and began to rub my temples, trying to get rid of the oncoming headache. My father's campaign paid child support. His former secretary. A pretty secretary, too. There was only one explanation. I have a brother. The brother I never knew existed. And he lives in Grant City, Illinois. Gradually, the pain in my head subsided and was replaced by calm as a plan began to form in my head. With a smile, I leaned forward and began typing. When I was done, I printed out the document, then picked up the phone and called HR. Yes, Marcia, this is Mark Roberts. I just wanted to know if you're there. How can I help you, Mark? She answered. I want to hand over my letter of resignation, I said, and hung up before she could respond. I left the office before my partners returned from lunch. That's how I ended up on that balcony 8 hours later, where it all began. The car was sold, the bank account was closed, the clothes were packed into one suitcase, and the train ticket was bought. I watched the sun gradually disappear below the horizon, took one last look at the Mississippi flowing below, picked up my guitar and suitcase, turned and left. I went in search of my brother and had a long conversation with Clarice Talbot. I was boarding the City of New Orleans train to start a new life somewhere else, far from the cold betrayals of those who supposedly loved me, so depressed that he couldn't even hum the damn tune while sitting on the train. When I got off the Amtrak train in Chicago, I walked straight to the doors of Union Station and walked outside toward the Atrium building. There was a train leaving for Grant City in 20 minutes, and I wanted to catch it. An hour and 30 minutes later, swaying in time with the movement of the train, I looked out the window at the passing landscape. I hadn't been to Chicago since I graduated from law school, and now I was wishing I had eaten at least one of my old haunts. I could visit old professors, meet classmates, whatever. Something that would help me feel like I still had a past and people in that past who really cared about me. Next stop, Grant City, said a voice over the speakers. Everyone comes out to Grant City. This is the last stop. Damn it, I understood it the first time, I thought, looking around at the other 4 passengers scattered around the car. People I have never seen and will probably never see again. And then it dawned on me. I couldn't go back to Chicago to see those I knew. We are talking about presidential elections, and my father's career in the Senate is also in jeopardy. They will look for me, try to find out where I went and what I am doing. They will want to persuade me to come back and just play my role in this performance to the end. I chuckled, imagining their concern. I was surprised that no one came to see me yesterday afternoon. There were definitely calls, but I sent everything to voicemail. Now they knew that I had left. If not now, then they will definitely find out when Sandy returns home and sees that my things and my favorite guitar are no longer there. They were probably running around like crazy now, and that picture gave me more satisfaction than anything that had happened to me since Pat Trolson made his dinner speech. Ever since they accidentally showed their cards over late brandy and bourbon. Let them go to hell. Every single one. I won't dwell on the events of the next few days. The basics are quite simple. I came to Grant City, found out that the town was too small for a taxi, but not too big that I couldn't carry my suitcase to the hotel a mile and a half from the station, had lunch at a diner next door, then went to a nearby store where he bought a decent used car with the proceeds from selling his car, after which he went in search of a realtor and housing. I spent the morning of the second day moving my suitcase and guitar into a furnished studio apartment, getting a new driver's license, and driving around the city looking for work. At 15 minutes to 11, I parked at a roadside tavern. The sign said, "Bartender wanted." I haven't stood behind a bar since law school, but what's so hard about it? A gin and tonic is a gin and tonic, and from the looks of this place, it will also be a gourmet drink for these parts. When I walked in, it took a little time for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. "How can I help?" I heard a voice from the right and turned around. A large man, about 40 years old, about 6 feet 4 inches tall, and weighing nearly 300 pounds, was mopping the floor behind the horseshoe-shaped bar. "Are you still looking for the bartender?" I asked. He nodded towards the bar stool, then leaned his elbows on the mop and said, "My name is Ferlin Fargo." I hesitated, not knowing whether to tell my real name. "Mark Roberts." "Well," Ferlin said, his eyes sliding to my watch. "The gold Rolex my parents gave me for my law school graduation." "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "Last time I checked, it was." "And you know how to work behind a counter, Mark Roberts," he said with such an intonation, as if he did not believe in any of my words, neither in my name nor in the fact that I was a bartender. I smiled. "Last time I checked, everything was exactly like that." "Have you done this before? Were you a bartender?" "A little." "What do you mean, a little?" "I worked as a bartender in college for a while." "Can you do Rob Roy? Manhattan? Old-fashioned margarita daiquiri?" I nodded. "Then make me one," Ferlin challenged. "Which one exactly?" "Old-fashioned." I stood up, walked to the bar, looked around, nodded, and reached for the highball. "Just tell me what's in it," he said. "I don't see the point in wasting good alcohol." "Mash some sugar with bitters, add a shot of bourbon, fill a glass with ice, and a splash of soda. Side dish, cherry and orange slices, if available." He smiled reluctantly. "We have them, of course." "Still in the refrigerator?" I asked, nodding towards the small refrigerator under the cash register. "Yes, only we use bar sugar." "No problem." His eyes narrowed. "Where are you from, Mark Roberts?" "From the South." "More current?" I didn't say anything, I just looked at him. "Are you on the run from the law?" "No." "From your ex-wife?" "Not yet." He looked at me for a couple more seconds, trying to figure out if I was telling the truth. Then he shrugged, apparently satisfied or simply losing interest, and extended his hand. $10 an hour. From 10:30 to 6, Monday to Friday. Maybe a few hours on the weekend if you want, or if someone gets sick. Can you handle it? Tipping policy. Your tips are yours. If you work with someone, you split tips for the time you work together. You can give some to the waitresses if they help you, or maybe to the janitor if he brings you beer or ice. Your decision. Whatever you decide, they will help you. Quite fair. Prices. There is a list next to the cash register. If there are specials, and they're usually only on Fridays or Saturdays, when there's a band playing or something like that, the prices don't change. I shrugged. Everything seems simple. He snorted. "Let's see. So I'm accepted. Looks like it. When to start? Is it okay now? Am I dressed okay?" I asked, looking at my jeans, loafers, no socks, and white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. If anything, even too elegant. "Do you want to change clothes? It suits me if it suits you." "It suits me." I extended my hand. "Thank you." He shook my hand with his huge paw and didn't let go. "Don't steal from me, Mark Roberts. I'll find out, okay? This won't happen. Don't let this happen." He squeezed my hand, looking at me intently, then let go and smiled faintly. "Welcome to the hitching rail. Glad to be here." He pointed to the mop. "See if you can clean this place up before people start arriving in 10 minutes, huh?" I took a mop and started working. "Thank you, God," I heard Ferlin mutter to himself as he disappeared to the other side of the building, probably into the kitchen. Before I knew it, The first customers had already started arriving, 7 people before a tall, lanky girl with curly bleached hair rushed into the bar at 10:30, all in a panic. "Sorry I'm late," she said, handing me her bag before grabbing her black apron and order pad. "Looks like we're doing okay," I said, placing the remaining drinks on the tray. "I'll take this," she said, her gaze darting from the drinks to the room and back. "This one has 2 cherries," she said, pointing to the glass of Coca-Cola. "Levon always asks for 2 cherries." I threaded 2 cherries onto a skewer and placed them on top. "Next, I'll do it myself," she said with a bright smile, lifting the tray onto her shoulder. Forward. 2.5 hours later, I was washing the last of the dirty glasses from the lunch rush when the curly-haired girl plopped down on her chair with a loud sigh. "Wednesdays can be a real nightmare, you know." "Not really." Her head jerked and her eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Mark." "When did you start?" "This morning." She smiled brightly and extended her hand across the bar. "Well, Mark, nice to meet you." I shook her hand and asked, "What's your name?" She rolled her eyes as if that was the dumbest question she'd heard in a long time. "Debbie." "Debbie, who's always late and still hasn't cleared her tables," Ferlin said, walking heavily toward the bar. "It's her," she agreed, then jumped up and turned to Ferlin. "God, just trying to be friendly and stuff." "Be friendly when you clear your tables." Ferlin Fargo sat down at the bar, looking like a man who had just played a football game. His thick black hair was damp and tousled, his face was sweating, and his shoulders sagged under his sweat-soaked shirt. "Water," he croaked. I poured a tall glass, filled it with water, and placed it in front of him. He drank it all in one gulp, put the glass down, and nodded for me to repeat. I poured a second glass, and he also drained it in one gulp. "Thank you," he said, starting to breathe normally again, and energy appeared in his body. "Wednesdays can be a real bitch." "Why?" "Italian day, damn it. Spaghetti with meatballs, ravioli, sausage with peppers. The kitchen is full of boiling pots, like in a damn steam room there. Well, people seem to love it. Probably delicious." He looked at me, and I noticed a smile appear on his unshaven face. "Of course, it's delicious, but the main thing is cheap. That's why my ass hurts. So every day is not so busy." He chuckled. "Yes, they are all basically like that. True, Debbie is always 10 to 20 minutes late for work." "Always?" "Well, sometimes longer, but not much." "Never come earlier?" "Never." I looked at the waitress, who was at the other end of the room stacking dishes on her hands and humming to herself. "Clients love her. You are not. She can afford it. You are not. Understand?" "Bye," I said, trying to hold back a smile. "Bye? What does 'for now' mean? They don't like me yet, but they will love you." He looked at me, then spread his arms. "Great. Another prima donna. Damn great." I held back my laughter and continued cleaning. This was clearly better than writing appeals. After work, I drove slowly past the house at 714 Madison Street. It was a small bungalow, no more than 35 feet wide, painted white with yellow shutters and a green tile roof. However, everything was neat, and the yard was well groomed and trimmed. Behind the white lace curtains on the front window, I saw the shadow of a man moving towards the back of the house, probably to the kitchen. I parked at the curb and turned off the car. So what now? I found where Clarice Talbot and her son lived with my brother, but didn't know what to do next. My plan was to leave and find them. Well, I went and found them. But I can't just walk up and knock on the door, right? While I was thinking, a car passed me and turned into their driveway. Almost before he could stop, the rear passenger door swung open and a small boy in a bulky football uniform climbed out. Reaching back, he pulled out a football helmet, waved, stepped back, and slammed the car door. The front door opened, spilling warm light onto the front lawn on an autumn evening. A woman stood in the doorway with a tired smile on her pale face. The boy ran up to her, hugged her, and walked past into the house. She closed the door and followed him inside without looking back. So it was her. "This is Clarice Talbot." She looked much the same as she did in the photo of her with my father 8 years ago, only now she seemed more tired, frazzled, and sad. Even her smile for the boy was tired, although it radiated sincere warmth. Damn it, what did father do? How could he act so heartlessly? I felt my anger rising again, and I hit the steering wheel hard, angry at my years of ignorance. May they all burn in hell. Right in hell. About 2 weeks later, I walked into the hitching rail, where I was greeted by my overweight boss, the always grumbling and dissatisfied Ferlin Fargo. Take off your shirt and come with me. Take off your shirt. You wear those damn white shirts all the time. I'm surprised you haven't ruined one yet, but now you definitely will. What are we going to do? Help me move chairs and tables from the basement. Anything special? Meeting of the Lincoln County Women's Bar Association. They meet once a month, changing meeting places. We have them 3 times a year. Today, it's our turn again. I smiled. So, does that mean I have to serve a crowd of female lawyers? In a couple of hours, you won't smile like that anymore. They are terribly demanding and leave meager tips. I shrugged, unbuttoning my shirt. In the middle of moving more tables and chairs, Ferlin grumbled. So why do you always wear the same thing? That's all I have. Do you have any other shirts? Not the kind in which you can work. Have you thought about buying yourself something cheaper? At Walmart or somewhere else? No. You're strange. Whatever. Ferlin was like that. Too young to be a father, but too old to be a big brother. However, he treated everyone the same. He grumbled, swore, complained, and then smiled quietly or said a short thank you or simply patted them on the shoulder. Debbie seemed to adore him, even though he weighed a good 80 kilograms more than her and was 15 years older. She just glowed when he was around. All the employees were accustomed to his good-natured banter with everyone. So has anyone found you yet? He asked, leaning on the table and catching his breath after we finished. What do you mean? This is your future ex-wife, from whom you seem to be hiding. Nobody knows where I am. He nodded, his face becoming thoughtful. What? I faked it. It's none of my business. He shook his head. Okay, I said with a smile. So it's none of your business. And what? What did you want to say? It must be hard, he said. Just leave and be among strangers. You don't know anyone. No family. I smiled as I took a dry towel and wiped the sweat from my chest and under my arms. My brother is dead, died in a car accident. And my parents. Well, let's just say they are in league with my future ex-wife, okay? On her side, everything is a little more complicated. He nodded and left it while I put on my shirt. I helped Debbie serve the women from the bar association and then spent an hour and a half running around with drinks and refills. Most of them ignored me and treated me like a cockroach under their feet. 4 of them, however, smiled at me, touched me lightly, and glanced at me, letting me know that they might be free. One of them was about 50, plump, wearing a sweater that was too tight and a skirt too short for her age and figure, but her predatory gaze every time I walked past made me fear that she would grab me and throw me to the floor. The other was a platinum blonde, in her 20s, who looked at me the entire time, and when I met her gaze, she tilted her head slightly, as if to show her interest. But when she got up to go to the restroom, I noticed that she was tall and skinny, almost anorexic. Besides, silicone breasts and a flat ass did not improve the situation. She'd probably be cute if you like skinny, pipe cleaner models with big breasts. The other 2 were sitting nearby. One was short and slender, in her early 30s, with pale skin and tired eyes. She had limp hair that matched her general tired posture. She reminded me of Ally McBeal, looking exhausted in a business suit. She didn't flirt as much as the others, but she constantly looked at me, and when our eyes met, she looked away with slight embarrassment. Her smile seemed forced, she looked broken and unsure of herself. But the one sitting to her left was the most beautiful of the whole group. My eyes were glued to her from the moment she entered, and I could not look away until she sat down and I was distracted by responsibilities. She had it all: olive skin with a smooth, flawless face, thick black hair framing the face of a Latin American goddess, beautiful body with high firm breasts, round hips, and long slender legs. She looked like Pocahontas from those old school pictures. A classic dark beauty, tall, proud, and flawless. Dressed neither provocatively nor conservatively, her eyes and smile did not promise untold pleasures, but assessed the possibilities. Her dark eyes were direct and fearless. She was that porridge that was just right, and for half of the dinner I was imagining what it would taste like. They were all gone too quickly. And Ferlin was right. They left a little tip. The 50-year-old woman left me her phone number. At 5:20 that evening, I stood with my back to the bar, taking 3 bottles of Budweiser and 1 Leinenkugel from the refrigerator. "When you get free," I heard a voice to my right. Turning around, I was surprised to see 2 women from the bar association. No, not the one that looked like a pipe cleaner, and not the predator. It was Pocahontas who spoke first, and Ally McBeal sat next to her, trying to sit as low as possible on the bar stool. "Just a second, ladies," I said. I took the ordered bottles of beer and returned to them. "Gin and tonic and lime," said Pocahontas. I nodded, then turned to her friend. "What about you?" She looked at her companion, then at me. "The same, please." I made them drinks, brought them the change, and returned to my duties without saying another word. "Mark," Ferlin called me a few minutes later from the corner of the bar. I walked over and leaned against the counter, scanning the bar for empty glasses as Ferlin spoke in his deep, husky voice. "Could you work a double shift tomorrow? Terry's son is playing a match." I shrugged. "Certainly. Tomorrow is Friday, the busiest day. On Fish Day, we will run from lunch until closing." "I'm in." I was about to return to the center of the bar to keep an eye on the customers when Ferlin grabbed my arm. "Don't look back now," he said, lowering his voice, "but it seems to me that these 2 are looking at you." "Do you think so?" "It won't hurt if you come over and say hi every now and then. Do you know what I mean?" I tensed, and the slight smile disappeared from my face. "I'm not saying that you need to be macho," Ferlin began to justify himself. "I'm just saying that being friendly can't hurt. Understand?" I tried to return the smile and quietly answered, "Don't worry, I will try." Seeing an empty bottle being placed at the other end of the bar, I muttered, "Sorry," and slipped out of the conversation. "Ladies," I said, walking up to them a few minutes later and throwing a quick smile before looking around the bar again. "Are the drinks okay?" "The drinks are fine," the tall one answered. She managed to make this simple statement almost seductive by simply emphasizing the word drinks. "We actually wanted to know something about you." I looked at them and smiled. The tall one raised an eyebrow, but Ally McBeal seemed increasingly embarrassed and seemed to shrink from awkwardness. "And what interests you about me?" "Did you hear that, Whitney? A true Southern gentleman," she said, looking at me. "I just love the soft Southern accent." "We wanted to know your name," Whitney finally said. "Mark," I answered, drying my hands with a towel and extending my hand. "Mark Roberts." She shook my hand. Her palm was damp, and her handshake was weak and too quick. "And I'm Rebecca," said the other. Her handshake was, as I expected, firm and lasted long enough to convey some sense of intimacy. "Well, Whitney and Rebecca, nice to meet you." "Thank you," Whitney whispered, barely audible. "The pleasure is ours," said Rebecca. "Where are you from, Mark?" "From the south of here." "We know that," she continued. "But where exactly to the south?" "Much further south." "When did you move to Grant City?" "A couple of weeks ago." "Where do you live?" "In the apartment." "Are you going to play like this all night?" "What game?" She looked at me for a long time, as if she was trying to decide something. She was clearly not used to men who did not flatter her at first sight, but it seemed she had no intention of backing down. Her face softened and a smile appeared. "Okay," Rebecca said. "Sorry for bothering you with questions. We're just wondering, are you free?" "He's married," Whitney said suddenly, looking at my left hand, on which the mark of the ring was still visible. For some reason, I couldn't take my eyes off the pale girl. Her expression said she had expected this disappointment and relief at the same time. but there was also sadness and some slight shade of blue on her face, as if she felt bad. "This is true? Are you married, Mark?" I raised my hand with my ring finger. "It's just a mark, not a ring." "So you're divorced?" "Something like that." "Have you already finished this, or are you still in the process?" I shrugged. Whitney surprised me by saying, "This sucks, right?" I turned to her and looked carefully. "I would say, more than you can imagine. But something tells me I'm wrong, right?" Her face became even paler, and she nodded slightly. Rebecca put her arm around Whitney's shoulders and squeezed her hand lightly. "Don't give up, honey. There is still so much ahead in life." She smiled weakly in response and muttered, "Sorry." I bowed my head. "For what? Because you're in the same sinking boat as me? My boat sank a little over a year ago, and you still haven't gotten to your feet." "She's just having a hard time getting back on her feet," Rebecca explained. "A couple of the guys she's met since then have been real pigs. Are you a pig, Mark?" I smiled widely at both of them and increased my accent slightly. "Of course not. I'm a Southern gentleman, remember?" "Exactly," Rebecca replied, smiling back at me. Whitney finally regained some color as well and smiled faintly. "Sorry, ladies," I said, noticing several empty bottles on the bar and heading off to do my duties. When I returned, they were already leaving. "See you," Rebecca said with a small wave of her hand. I waved back and looked after them. The rest of the evening passed like most of the previous 14. I parked down the street from Clarice Talbot's house, watching as my little brother was brought home and ran inside, energized. Then I would go home, make soup and a sandwich, play the guitar, and watch TV. I still couldn't figure out how to move on. There was now no doubt that little Schuyler Talbot was my brother. He looked exactly like I did at his age, and probably like my father. However, simply approaching Clarice and joining her life, and therefore my little brother's life, seemed too drastic a step. On the other hand, it was necessary to do something to move from the dead point. In the meantime, I was content to simply watch the little me in a uniform that weighed almost as much as he did. Then my thoughts, as usual before bed, returned to Sandy. My parents and her parents were banished to a dark corner of my memory so as not to spoil the mood. Feelings for Sandy were more conflicting. When the shock passed, I was able to analyze our relationship more soberly. For example, her behavior and absence for 3 months, while I was busy with the case of Napoleon Bonaparte Bonnaroo. Now, I'm pretty sure she was having an affair. The problem is that I didn't know how to feel about it. If she saw our entire marriage as a scam that she thought I was going to end soon, then how guilty was she? We weren't really married, were we? I kept coming back to this question. After all, she did not hesitate for a second to end the possible romance when she saw the news that Nap was now free. She immediately came back to me with remorse and regret written all over her face. And from then on, our marriage became fun and, in my opinion, loving and at least mutually satisfying. I also replayed our relationship in my head many times, but could not find any signs that she had many lovers on the side. On the contrary, our personal life, her moods, our work schedule, everything was quite smooth and stable over all the years of our existence together. If anything, after those 3 months of suffering during the appeal, things got even better. The last thing on my mind was whether Sandy knew about my ignorance. Looking back, I could recall hundreds of comments and expressions that, in retrospect, indicated that she believed that I was fully aware of our parents' arrangement. But on the other hand, she never said this directly. She never said, "You know, I'm glad our parents convinced us to get married for Dad's campaign, and I'm glad we gave it a chance for more than a couple of years." Here was the rub. Were her comments a hint that I knew the whole story, or were they mocking my ignorance and the situation she was in? Once again, after so many nights, I lay down under the sheets and stared at the ceiling, pondering the answers. The following Thursday, I was taken by surprise twice. First, Rebecca went for a drink after work without Whitney. "Gin and tonic and lime," I asked when she sat down. "Very good," she replied, her smile so bright and dazzling that my knees almost buckled. When I put the drink in front of her and she paid, she asked, So, Mark, do you have a last name? Roberts. Her eyes narrowed. I've heard this name somewhere before. Are you a celebrity? I waved my hands around the horseshoe-shaped bar. Monday to Friday from 11 to 6. Her expression remained thoughtful, her lips pursed in concentration. Sorry, I said a moment later, rushing to get beer for the crowd of construction workers coming through the door. When I finished, I heard Ferlin swearing into the phone behind me. Turning around, I saw him forcefully hang up the phone. Problems? Damn group, he said. Golden Rodeo was supposed to play here tomorrow night from 9 to 1. But their singer and bassist were in an accident last night. Seriously injured. They'll have to cancel the show. I frowned. This is not good. Yes, Sherlock. His blood pressure, which was never low anyway, seemed ready to burst through the top of his head like a geyser. The management company says that all other groups are full. There is no replacement. I nodded, gave it less thought than I should have, and said, I can play if you want. His eyes narrowed, then widened, then he laughed. Yes, of course. You. It stung painfully. I'm not kidding. Play what? Guitar. And singing too. Have you done this before? Yes. I played in a band all through college and law school. Are you still in the band? He asked, narrowing his eyes again and thinking seriously. No. Any chance of collecting them in a day? I shook my head, then said, but I don't have to. I can just play guitar and sing. What music? Anything. Not this rap or heavy metal stuff, okay? It's hard to play this alone with just a guitar. He nodded, crossing his arms and scratching the stubble on his chin with his sausage-thick finger. Equipment? I have an acoustic guitar. No amps, no microphone, no electric guitar, no mixing board. And the acoustics are connected. Can you run it through the speakers? I nodded, built in. And you say you can handle it? I smiled. What do you have to lose? That settled the matter. Let me make a couple of calls. For what? I think I can get you all the equipment. If there's an electric guitar, I'll go with the Telecaster, I said. You'll take what I can get, he said, turning his back to me and picking up the phone. Turning around with a big smile on my face, I saw Whitney slide onto the bar stool next to Rebecca. Her eyes were glued to Rebecca's phone, who was telling her something. Then they both looked at me and Whitney's eyes went wide. Damn technology, I thought, raising my glass to make another gin and tonic. And you're a lawyer, Mark Roberts, Rebecca said, and apparently a pretty good one, and you were married to the governor's daughter. And the senator's son, Whitney interjected, continuing her attack. So what is a senator's son, married to a governor's daughter, doing here, pouring booze instead of practicing law in Tennessee? Rebecca asked, then sat back, waiting for an answer. My lips pursed. Well, Whitney faked it when it became clear I wasn't going to answer. I looked at one, then at the other, not knowing whether to answer or not. Long story, I muttered. Rebecca raised her eyebrows and Whitney said, Your marriage fell apart and you ran away here. Something like that. Do they know where you are? I hesitated, then shook my head. That's pretty mean, isn't it? Not only the words, but also her tone were the same, harsh, caustic, and condemning. I was furious. Sneaky. After all the crap I've been through for my family and my wife? I don't know, I said through clenched teeth. You want to tell me about your divorce, how you were perfect, and it was all his fault. I almost regretted it before the words left my lips. Whitney looked like I had punched her in the solar plexus. Her mouth opened slightly, her face turned pale, and she seemed about to cry. Rebecca was also stunned, her eyes darting between Whitney and me. Jesus, she said, hugging the object of my rage. Chill it, both of you. Rebecca recovered enough to give me a look that could have incinerated me on the spot. Fortunately, I didn't back down. Instead, I tried to deal with my anger. After a few seconds, I turned away from them and walked to the other side of the bar, busy washing dirty glasses in the sink. A few minutes later, I saw the door open and watched as they both walked out. No excitement this time. Instead, I tried to control my breathing so as not to throw something and kill some poor soul on the other side of the bar. Considering that there were mostly construction workers on the other side of the bar, I thought that if I threw the bottle, I would survive no more than 20 seconds. After a couple of minutes, someone called me, and I turned around to see who needed a drink. "Damn it, Mark," one of the workers said with a wry grin. "Why did you do that? They were the only pretty girls in this fucking place." I tried to smile and shrug, but it only came out as something of a pathetic idiot, and then I walked around the bar to get drinks. When I reached the half-drunk cocktails Rebecca and Whitney had left behind, I almost picked up my napkin without noticing what she had written there. "You were right. Sorry." Now, I really felt like a jerk that the workers remembered to remind me until I finished my shift and went home. Late the next day, I was still in a bad mood, waiting for my shift to end so I could go home and get somewhere where I wouldn't be found. I was pulled out of my thoughts by Ferland's knock on the counter at 2:30. "Yes?" "Let's go," he said. "Debbie will tend the bar while we're gone." "Where are we going?" "Pick up the equipment you need." Damn it, I thought. I completely forgot. "Are you coming?" he asked as I stood there like an idiot. I threw the rag on the counter and followed him. 10 minutes later, we turned onto a long gravel road and headed towards a house that was neither new nor old, neither big nor small, just neat. To the right was a field with a well-kept lawn, several ancient oak trees with leaves softly rustling in the wind, and at the end stood a simple hangar. As we approached the back of the house, the door opened and a man came out to greet us. A man I think I've seen somewhere. He walked towards us with a wide smile and extended his hand to Ferland 10 steps before the meeting. "Hi, Ferland." "Cup." They shook hands. Then the guy wrapped his arms around Ferland's massive figure in a tight hug. When they released their grip, he turned to me and smiled. "Hi, I'm Teddy Cooper." I smiled and nodded. Of course, Teddy Cooper, vocalist and guitarist for General Beauregard. "Mark Roberts," I said, shaking his hand. "Come on," he said, heading towards the shed and saying to Ferlina, "Why don't you drive the Jeep up to the shed?" I followed while Ferland returned to the car. "Choose anything," he said as we walked inside. Flipping a switch, he turned on the bright lights, which illuminated the touring band's full array of instruments. Drums, bass guitars, keyboards and 2 pianos, acoustic and electric guitars, effects pedals, mixing consoles, microphones, cables, wires, everything except the light show. "We often rehearse here before the tour." "Are we not burdening you?" He smiled. "Not one bit. We got back about a month ago. We're all taking a break while Nick, Will, and I work on new songs and arrangements." I nodded. "Do you have any idea what I need?" "Of course. I've already played in that place. Come on, help me." Teddy, Ferland, and I loaded up a couple of amps, some cords, a small mixing console, and a boom mic. "What kind of guitar do you want?" he asked, catching his breath. "What do you have?" "Preferences." "Telecaster." He nodded towards the row of guitars to the side. "Choose." I looked. Among them were 3 Fender Telecasters, several Les Pauls, a Stratocaster, a Paul Reed Smith, a Gretsch, and 2 Rickenbackers. "All yours?" I asked, envying him. "Some of them are Nika." "Does it matter?" "What he doesn't know won't hurt him." I looked at him. "Nevertheless, if all the same." He laughed. "Okay, take this one." He grabbed a white Telecaster from the row and walked towards the row of hard cases. He opened the case with the inscription Nick, put the guitar inside, and closed it. "I wouldn't like—" "Really?" Teddy interrupted. "He doesn't care, and it's the best of the bunch. Lots of special features at his request, and it's definitely the easiest to play with. You'll be going it alone, so it's best to get something worthwhile, right?" I hesitated, then nodded briefly. Thank you. Will you be there today? Ferlin asked as I loaded the guitar into the Jeep. Around 8:30, I'll have plenty of time to set everything up. You don't need. His gaze cut off my words mid-sentence. He was already the 10th person in the last 24 hours who looked at me like I was crazy. You'll never get everything right in that damn barn. I've played there before. I'll have it all set up in a minute. Fair. He smiled and extended his hand. Great. See you then. Thank you. My pleasure. Ferlin laughed quietly most of the way back to work. What's so funny? I finally asked. You? God, Mark. I know you recognized him, but you didn't show it. It's like nothing special. I've met famous people before, I explained. Yes? So famous? Who, for example? Oh, I don't know, I thought. People like the president, many legislators, governors, and big people from show business, and so on. Hell, I once played a duet with Alan Jackson on guitar, and he's pretty famous, I wanted to say. But he didn't say anything. Just famous people, I finally said. But after all this time, you act like it's no big deal the whole time, and suddenly you're at a loss when he offers to help with the setup. I just didn't expect it, I said. I mean, I'm sure he has better things to do, right? No, replied Ferlin. His wife and children left. He's probably bored now. I was silent almost the rest of the way, but when we pulled into the parking lot, he said, How do you know him, Teddy? Everyone here knows him, like almost the whole group, especially Teddy and Nick. I'm a year older than both of them. We've known each other for a long time. And they both still live here. Teddy never left. Nick came back around the time Leadfoot broke up and General Beauregard formed. Wow. He parked the Jeep, turned it off, and turned to me. Look closely, and you'll see more than just them. What do you mean? We're not that far from Chicago, he explained. Far enough to be in the countryside, but not so far that it's hard to get into the city. So quite a lot of famous and influential people live here. For example, he listed the names of the director, 2 writers, some coaches and players from the Bears, Cubs and White Sox, and a few others. Do they all live nearby? Everything is within 10 miles. Where? He smiled. You're driving down a country road, and you see a long driveway disappearing into the trees. Chances are one of them lives in one of those places. Wow, I thought. It's almost like living in Nashville again. No wonder no one takes it too seriously. However, I must admit that Teddy Cooper was surprisingly easy to talk to, and I was at least a little nervous that he would evaluate my acting and singing. Teddy was there as promised. 20 minutes after his appearance, all the equipment was connected and the amplifiers were balanced. He showed me how to use the effects pedals attached to the floor next to the microphone stand, then nodded, wished me luck, and dove into the growing crowd for a beer. Almost everyone patted him on the back as they passed by, and he stopped to chat with many of them. I heard a knock on the small stage to my right, and Ferlin said, "Move over, son." I took a step to the side. He leaned under the microphone, turned it on, and tapped to make sure it was working. Okay, he told the crowd in his husky voice, here's the thing. A couple of the guys from Golden Rodeo got into an accident, so they can't play here today. Mark said he could fill in for them. There was some jeering and catcalling, and I couldn't tell if it was contempt or good-natured teasing. Probably both. Several individuals were genuinely upset to hear that Golden Rodeo would not be playing. Just wait, Lou, Ferlin shouted to the heavy, short-haired man leading his wife to the door. The man stopped. Give him at least 2 or 3 songs before you decide my initial instincts about Mark's talents were correct, huh? The man nodded and shouted, I'll give him 2. We agree. So I ask you to applaud the man who is making his debut today in our humble establishment. The timid applause was better than I expected. Ferlin stepped away from the microphone, leaned over, and whispered in my ear, I want you to conquer them, understand? Conquer them. Then he smiled widely and slapped me sharply on the back. I smiled back, watched him step off the stage and disappear into the crowd, then looked at the 60 or so waiting faces ready to see me try and fail. Instead, I smiled and slowly started playing the intro to what I thought would be a good opening song. 20 seconds later, I walked up to the microphone and hit the right tone, starting from the first line. Well, I left. From Oklahoma in a Pontiac, almost lost my mind. I was going to Arizona or maybe to California where people live for their own pleasure. The crowd hesitated at first, then I saw people start stomping their feet to the beat, and by the time I played the instrumental bridge, after the first chorus of Tulsa Time, they were already cheering and whistling. Even Lou and his wife walked up to the bar and grabbed another beer. Then I realized that I would not be kicked out of here. I took my only break at 10 minutes past 10, and the place was packed. Would you like a beer? Ferlin shouted over the noise to my right. I shook my head. No, thanks. Just water. He smiled, gave a thumbs up, and pushed through the crowd towards the bar. The crowd almost parted from me as I moved toward the front door for a breath of fresh air. There were the occasional pats on the back, nods of the head, compliments, but mostly they talked, drank, and waited for the break to end so they could get back on the dance floor. You are a man of many talents. I heard someone's voice almost in my ear as a hand lay on my shoulder. It was short, slightly frazzled Whitney. I smiled tiredly. Thank you. Are you going outside? I nodded. Do you mind if I keep you company? I don't mind. She pushed her way through the crowd at the bar, set her glass down on the bar, then turned and followed me. I went out and looked at the stars, enjoying the sharp, icy air that cooled me down. I'm serious, she said, her voice louder than usual. Silence after a room filled with noise. I'm really sorry about what I said yesterday. Me too, I said. I was wrong. I deserve it. I didn't say anything. I just tried to cool down. The pause in conversation seemed to make her nervous. You're really good. You seem to know a ton of songs. I used to play in a band when I was still studying. Why did you quit? Marriage and career somehow got in the way. It happens sometimes. Maybe. We were both silent for a few minutes, and I glanced at her furtively. She looked at the stars, her face deep in thought. I was right, huh? I asked. She turned and looked at me. She looked at me for a long time, her lips pursed in thought, then nodded. I'm divorced, and it's almost entirely my fault. What? Short answer or full answer? I looked at my watch. Whatever you want to say in the next 9 minutes. She sighed, then looked back up at the dark sky, dotted with millions of stars. Short answer, I cheated on him. Long answer, we shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. Why? Because I'm not sure I ever really loved him. These words were like a slap in the face. I felt goosebumps run down my arms in the cold, and a deep chill ran from head to toe. I loved him, of course, but it was more respect and admiration. He is a good man, a great man, reliable, smart, handsome. He was everything a husband should be. But there was never a spark. Then why did you marry him? At the time, it seemed like the right move. I was in my 20s. It seemed like it was time. But why him? He was comfortable, easy to get along with. And it never grew into something more. She looked at me with an expression of unbearable torment. It got worse, at least for me. Then the career, it all took over. And it just got to the point where I was afraid to go home. It wasn't Luke, it was me. Other than our son, we had nothing in common. We didn't want the same things. We didn't have the same hobbies, interests, nothing. Except for my son. Except Kyle, she agreed. Did you ever tell him that? She shook her head. It's better that he thinks that I just cheated, that another man came between us. This is nonsense. Her face became determined. If I had told him the truth, told Luke that I was unhappy almost from the very beginning, Even before we got married, he would have lost all his memories. What? Think about it, Mark. You look back on your marriage. You have happy memories, right? Memories when you were both in love, having fun, and everything was wonderful, right? I didn't say anything. To tell the truth, everything seemed different now. Sandy's motives and feelings were now confused and unclear. The way things are, Sandy continued, her eyes turning to the stars again. Luke has memories of 10 years of happiness while we were dating and married, and only the last 5 or 6 months of pain and suffering. I don't want to take that away from him. It's the only thing I can do. I don't need to destroy his perception. And he doesn't suspect. Occam's razor. He accepted the simplest explanation. I thought about it, realizing that she was probably right, at least for herself and Luke. The problem for me was that I had already begun to doubt every memory I had previously cherished. It was as if someone had turned the lens of a kaleidoscope, and now the daisies became dandelions. I didn't know what the real painting looked like. It's time for you to go back, she said, bringing me back to reality. I looked at my watch. Yes, I said, then leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. Sorry again. She tried her best to smile, then looked up at the stars again as I went back inside. Teddy Cooper stopped me on my way back to the stage. You're doing great, kid. Thank you, I said, pleased with myself. Do you have anything of your own? Like what I wrote myself? Yes. I shrugged. Certainly. Why don't you play a couple? I looked at him, then back at the crowd already clearing the dance floor. I'm not sure they'll like it. Just one or two. Mix them in. Don't say these are your songs. They won't understand. Unless they turn out to be completely crap, I said. He laughed. Yes, there is such a risk. I shrugged. Let's see what we can do. When I got back on stage and plugged my guitar back in, I looked around the crowd and saw Whitney come back in and look around for her drink. Rebecca handed her the glass, and they both turned to look at the stage. Without taking my eyes off Whitney, I picked up the Taylor acoustic, placed the capo on the second fret, and leaned toward the microphone. There are two very beautiful ladies over there at the counter with no men next to them to ask them to dance. I'm going to do a slow dance in 10 seconds, and hopefully someone will ask them to the dance floor before I start. I saw Rebecca laugh and accept the first hand extended to her. Whitney, on the other hand, seemed to shrink. Then a slender man of about 40 stepped towards her, extended his hand, and after hesitating a little, she took his hand and followed him. I plucked the strings with my fingers, and most people immediately recognized the song. With her head on the man's shoulder, I could see her lips moving to the words as I reached the chorus. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, you just need to call. And I will be there, yes, I will be, because you are my friend. That was amazing, son, Ferlin infused as he stood behind the bar, counting the proceeds and putting stacks of money into a small bank bag. You drew a crowd and kept it there. Just incredible. I drank my first beer of the night while Marla and Denise swept, washed, and hauled a huge trash can, collecting empty bottles and cans scattered throughout the place. I took another sip and smiled tiredly. It was nice. I haven't done this for a long time, and now I realize that I miss it. Very. Play, crowd, energy. Even just playing for a bar crowd was fun if you got into their groove, played what they wanted to hear, and made them have fun and forget their worries for a while. Today I did it. I didn't want to stop, and eventually Ferlin had to go on stage at 20 minutes past 1 to announce the last song, after which everyone had to start leaving until the cops arrived and shut the place down. Can you hear me? He suddenly said, standing right in front of me. Sorry, I said, turning to him. I asked, how much do you want for tonight? I shook my head. Nothing. That won't do, he replied, his voice becoming quiet and serious. You brought me a lot of money. You got me out of trouble. If it weren't for you, this place would be empty. I shrugged. Nothing special. Don't worry about it. He slid $400 bills across the bar in my direction. It's a little less than I would pay at the Golden Rodeo, but they're a whole bunch. I looked at the money, then at him. I don't want them, Ferlin. You'll take them. No, I won't take it. Yes, you will. Take the damn money, Denise shouted. He won't leave until you take them, but we need to go home. I looked at Denise and Ferlin in turn, with a big smile on my face. Shut up, Ferlin said. So you too? I asked. We've been married before, he said, almost in a whisper. Trying to get back together? I asked, trying to speak more quietly. I hear you, she said sharply. And no, we're not trying to get back together. We just want to sleep. Both of us. I laughed. What's so funny? Ferlin asked. Nothing. I just think I don't know. What? Really, Ferlin? I don't know. It's just weird, I guess. Why? He was serious. It was not strange for him to go to his ex-wife's house to relieve tension. You really can't see this? No, I don't see it. I chuckled, then reached for the money. You know what? I'll take that much. Keep the rest, but you're responsible for returning the equipment to Teddy in the morning, okay? I left 2 bills on the counter and Ferlin looked at them for a moment, then shrugged and put them in his pocket. Fair enough. That reminds me, Teddy wants you to call him tomorrow. For what? Didn't say. Do you have his number? In a notebook, under the name Jenny Cooper. I finished my beer. Okay, I said. I got up, took my Taylor acoustic in its hard case, and went home to fall into bed. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.